The moon shines brightly and illuminates the black water of the ocean. Thick fog descends on it in ominous silence. Then, it's suddenly broken by the creaking of wooden boards, followed by a rippling of the waves. Through the fog, you see the outline of an old, large ship. Its hull is rusty, and a strange cold is coming from it. But the most unsettling thing is that there's no one on the deck. The ship sails without a crew. No, this isn't a mythical Flying Dutchman, but a very real ghost ship. September 2nd, 2019. The British Royal Navy's ice patrol ship, called the HMS Protector, sails through the calm waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The time is 11 p.m. Some of the ship's crew are on deck, while others are sleeping in their cabins. The captain steers the ship and looks straight at the horizon. The sky is lit up by an orange twilight, and clouds float in the distance. Suddenly, against this beautiful landscape, one of the sailors notices the black silhouette of an unknown ship. The captain slows down and steers the ship a little closer to the mysterious vessel. This is an old cargo ship, 250 feet long. Attempts to contact the crew members lead to nothing. It seems the unknown boat is floating in the ocean by itself. There's no one on board, at least, no one alive. The deck of the ship creaks from rocking on the waves. The sun sinks below the horizon, and it gets dark. The ship looks terrifying. British sailors don't dare to climb on that strange deck. They take a photo, post it on the internet, and sail away. Many people on the internet will assume the sailors met a real ghost ship. 5 months later, we're in the village of Ballycotton in County Cork, Ireland. A local leaves the house early in the morning to go for a daily run. Music in his headphones, fresh cool air, and a scenic route are ideal conditions for a good workout. The jogger runs along the road on the coast of the Celtic Sea. There was a strong storm last night, and now the sea looks calm. The man runs along the top of a low cliff and notices a huge vessel. An old rusty cargo ship 250 feet long lies on the beach, right among the rocks. No people on board. It seems the ship has been here for ages, but the local is sure this vessel wasn't here yesterday. A little later, it turns out this is the same ship that the sailors from the HMS Protector saw 5 months ago, thousands of miles from this place. The cargo ship, called the Alta, was built in 1976. Nobody knows who used it all this time and for what purposes. It's only known that in 2017, the ship was purchased by a new owner and marked with the flag of Tanzania. It's important to say that almost all cargo ships are equipped with AIS, Automatic Identification System, which is needed to track ship movements in the ocean. Since 2015, something strange started happening with the Alta's AIS. The ship disappeared from the satellites, then reappeared again. Over the past few years, this ship had changed several names and flags. It's not surprising that its AIS shut off and turned on numerous times. It's said that some of those who disable AIS on their ships do so to hide outlaw activities. The ship's captain, whoever it was, clearly didn't want to show the Alta's movements. As AIS showed in 2017, the ship had sailed near Greek port cities. The Alta made 12 stops in 3 such cities in different parts of Greece. Then, the AIS signal disappeared, and 10 months later, the Alta reappeared near the northern coast of Africa, 1,200 miles from Greece. In September of 2018, the ship was sailing about 1,400 miles southeast of Bermuda, and at that time, the crew members started having problems. There were 10 people on board the Alta. On September 19th, the ship's engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The nearest shore was very far away. The ship began to drift. As days passed, the crew couldn't fix the vessel. Food supplies were running low. The crew started to panic and tried to contact someone. The situation got worse as a strong hurricane was approaching the place where the ship broke down. crew members contacted the U.S. Coast Guard. On October 2nd, a helicopter headed towards the ship. Food and water were unloaded on the Alta. This was enough for the crew to bide their time for several days. About a week later, a rescue boat sailed about 1,500 miles to reach the Alta and help the stranded sailors. Shortly before the start of the hurricane, American rescuers succeeded. The entire crew of the wrecked ship was taken to Puerto Rico. The Alta remained drifting in the ocean. After a while, another ship arrived to tow it to the coast of Guyana. Then, something went wrong again. The ship was hijacked. Who did it and why remains a mystery to this day. But then, for some unknown reason, the thieves decided to abandon the ship and left it to drift in the ocean. For almost a year, the ship's location couldn't be tracked. Then, in September 2019, the vessel was found by the British Royal Navy. How the Alta was able to cover the distance across the Atlantic and wash up on the coast of Ireland is unknown. An investigation has been launched in Ireland. It's necessary to identify the owner of the vessel and find a responsible person to take on the task of towing it. But no one has since been found. Once, an unknown person called the Irish authorities and introduced themselves as the owner of the ship, but didn't provide any evidence. Several barrels of oil were found on board the Alta. To dismantle the ship, the Irish authorities will need to spend about 10 million euros. Local residents are annoyed by the wreck too. Corroding metal is bad for the environment, and kids have already snuck on board and posted a video on the internet from inside the abandoned ship. The further fate of the Alta remains unresolved. It's still lying there. That ship sailed in the ocean for just 2 years. Now imagine if some other managed to drift for 38. In all that time, no one could catch this ship, and people still seek it. That vessel is called the SS Baychimo. It was a merchant ship owned by a Canadian trading company. In 1931, the ship got stuck in ice off the coast of Alaska. A strong snowstorm began. The team waited a week for it to end, but the storm only intensified. One day, the weather improved a bit, and part of the team was evacuated to the nearest city. Another part of the crew, with the captain, set up camp near the ship. The storm started again and didn't stop for a long time. The blizzard was so heavy that the ship's captain couldn't see beyond his arm's reach. Finally, when the storm was over, the captain saw that the ship simply vanished. He decided the Baychimo sank during the storm. A week later, the ship was found, drifting near the place where it was lost. The hull of the ship was damaged so badly that it was unsafe to sail on it. The captain decided to abandon the ship. However, it didn't sink. For the next 38 years, it was drifting at various points along the Alaskan coast. Several times, people climbed on the ship, including native Alaskan residents and a group of researchers. Attempts to save the vessel from the sea ended in failure. The salvage operations were hampered by drifting ice and bad weather. The last time it was seen was in 1969. The ship was frozen and blocked by the ice. In 2006, the government created a special project to find the Baychimo. However, in all these years, the ship still hasn't been found. Its fate is unknown. It's likely that the ship has finally found peace and is now lying on the seabed of the Chukchi Sea.
The voyage started just like any other. The cargo ship SS Cotopaxi is making another journey to Havana, Cuba to deliver coal. It's November 29, 1925. For Captain Meyer and his crew, leaving Charleston Port, South Carolina, it will be the last trip the ship ever makes. Its route ran through the Bermuda Triangle. 2 days into the trip, the Cotopaxi sent out a distress signal. It had got caught up in a strong tropical storm and turned over on its side. The wind was very strong and there was powerful lightning as well. Rain gradually filled the ship's hold. Then there was a bright white flash, and the ship disappeared without a trace. Later, its wreckage was found in the Gobi Desert, which is in a completely different part of the world. All 32 crew members, including the captain, were missing. Of course, the part about the Gobi Desert is fictional. For one of his movies, Steven Spielberg came up with the idea that the ship was moved there by aliens. Still, in real life, the ship was never found, and its crew really did disappear. It was officially declared missing a month afterward, and nobody could find the wreck. It seems like a classic case of mysterious things going on in the Bermuda Triangle. But most mysteries are solved sooner or later. In 2020, the Cotopaxi was found. A man named Michael Barnett had moved to Florida to study shipwrecks off the coast. One wreck in particular really caught his attention. It was much larger than the others, and the locals called it the Bear Wreck. It was about 40 miles from St. Augustine in northern Florida, but no one had ever managed to identify the rusty hull. So Michael started to do some detective work. He measured the size of the shipwreck and started working through all the information he could find. He researched hundreds of old newspapers, leafed through insurance records, and looked at artifacts found on the wreck. After hundreds of hours of hard work, Michael was sure it was the Cotopaxi. But a few years before, there had been a rumor that the same ship had been found off the coast of Cuba. The Coast Guard found the wreck of a cargo ship about the same size that looked a lot like the one lost in 1925. Michael was sure they were wrong, so he teamed up with some science journalists and kept investigating. Soon they discovered something that seemed to confirm Michael's belief. Divers found brass valves with the letters SV on them in the wreckage of the ship. Michael suggested these initials referred to Scott Valve Manufacturing Company. The headquarters of this company was in Michigan, not far from where the Cotopaxi had been built. The company had probably supplied parts for the Cotopaxi. So the puzzle seemed to be solved. The Bear Wreck was really the missing cargo ship. But Michael still needed to work out why the ship had sunk. Did something mysterious really happen to the Cotopaxi in the Bermuda Triangle? Later, Michael found the testimony of the ship's carpenter among some old papers. The carpenter claimed that the hatches covering the coal on the ship had been in a terrible condition before it sank. Repair work on the covers wasn't finished before the crew got the order to sail to Cuba. So if the hatch covers were still broken during the trip, water could have easily gotten on board. This water probably flooded the hold during the tropical storm. This was the real reason why the Cotopaxi went down. There was really nothing mysterious about it. It was just a mistake made by ordinary people. But this is just one example out of dozens or even hundreds where ships and planes have gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle. We still can't explain some of these incidents. It seems like there really is something weird going on there. One of these strange events happened in 1948. A passenger jet was headed for Miami from San Juan, Puerto Rico. It disappeared in the same area as the Cotopaxi. The 32 people on board vanished without a trace. The weather was clear throughout the flight, but experts think that when the plane was about 50 miles from the coast, it could have been hit by a strong wind that knocked it off course. Years later, a similar plane was found in the area of the Bermuda Triangle, but because no one could work out the registration, it was impossible to say for sure if it was the same one. Something even stranger occurred not long before, in 1945. 5 planes went missing all at the same time. Some trainee pilots were practicing their navigation skills, but when they'd finished, it seems they couldn't find their way back home and disappeared. Many people assume they just ran out of fuel. This seems likely, but still, the circumstances were really strange. The trainees were being supervised by an experienced pilot who had 2,500 hours of flight time. He would never have let a group of newbie pilots get that far away from their base. Even now, people still debate what could have happened. Some insist the pilots ran into something supernatural out there in the Bermuda Triangle. But who knows? And here's another freaky thing that happened there which no expert has been able to explain. Time travel. In 1970, Bruce Gernon was flying a plane from Andros Island to the Florida coast. When he was at 11,500 feet, a giant cloud appeared in front of him. It kept getting bigger and bigger, and he had no choice but to fly through it. As soon as he did, the plane was surrounded by darkness. It was as if the day had turned to night in a split second. Suddenly, Bruce began to see white flashes of light around him. They were so bright that they lit up the entire sky. But they weren't lightning bolts, although he couldn't really explain what they were. The plane continued through the strange cloud for almost a half an hour. Bruce noticed that the cloud changed shape during this time. The space around the plane turned into a tunnel. Then the tunnel started narrowing. Bruce became really tense as he tried to cope with the plane's controls. All his instruments and navigation equipment were going crazy, and the electronics stopped working. Then, a white light appeared at the end of the tunnel. Just like in the movies, the plane escaped the closing cloud tunnel at the very last second. Everything was fine, but now Bruce found himself in some white fog. He had no idea where he was. Then he managed to contact ground control. He was shocked when he learned that his plane was already in the airspace above Miami. It seemed that something impossible had happened. Bruce was meant to cover a distance of about 250 miles during the flight. This usually took 1.5 hours, but he had managed it in just 47 minutes, almost 2 times faster than normal. When Bruce landed, he went to check the amount of fuel left in the tank. It turned out he'd used up a lot less than the normal amount of fuel as well. Could there be a logical explanation for the time-traveling plane? Well, records show that a large number of sunspots were detected on the surface of the sun that day, and there was a strong solar wind. This could easily have made the electronics and devices on the plane go crazy. But what about the mysterious cloud? The Florida coast is a place where 2 large air currents meet. One has a high pressure and the other is a low pressure one. This causes a lot of storm clouds in the area. But people still debate how Bruce was able to cover the distance so quickly. Some people say that some kind of mysterious dark energy was involved. Others say it was a gravitational anomaly that curves space and time. Others think that Bruce is just a fraud. We still don't know the truth. So, is there really something supernatural about the Bermuda Triangle? Or is it all just coincidences and made-up stories? The truth is that no more planes and ships disappear in the Bermuda Triangle than anywhere else in the world.
It's 2018. You get up early in the morning to go ashore and catch some fish. You come to the spot you were yesterday, throw the hook into the sea, and wait. The float is twitching. You've caught some fish, but hey, hello? Why aren't you doing anything? Right now, you don't care about the fish. You're looking at something in the distance. You open your mouth in surprise since you see a huge ship stuck on a shoal. It wasn't here yesterday, so it got here at night. Okay, it'll probably sail away sooner or later. You fish for a few more hours. During this time, you observe the ship and notice no movement there. Is it empty? Boats and the Coastal Service are sailing from the shore to the vessel. You decide to check it out too. You get in your old boat and go there. The mist descends to the water, making the ship look creepy. The colossal vessel is rusty and empty. But where is the whole crew? And how did it get there? The Coast Guard comes on board. They search the hold, the cabins, and the upper deck. There's someone's stuff, some remnants of food supplies, notebooks, and clothes. Everything suggests the crew has disappeared for some reason. Fishers who noticed the vessel first didn't see anyone coming down from the board. No radio signals were sent to the port, and no one reported about the ship. It appeared here from nowhere. The only chance to get any information is to look at the number and name of the vessel. This is Sam Ratulangi PB 1600. The Coast Guard checks the information, studies the data of all the country ships, and no way. One company built the boat in 2001 in Indonesia. People used it to transport heavy loads across the seas around Asia. The ship had been properly operating for 8 years. People were delivering industrial goods to different points in the region. But something went wrong. In 2009, Sam Ratulangi was sailing near the coast of Taiwan, and that's it. There were no further records about it. There were no reports in any port. Everyone thought it must have drowned, so no one had been looking for it for years. And then, 9 years later, it appears here, big and rusty, off the coast of Myanmar, without sailors, without fuel. An investigation starts. City services are trying to find out the names of all the sailors working on the ship and find clues that would lead to solving this mystery. They also hope the ship owner will appear soon. They find 2 tow ropes on board. This means that some other ship towed Sam Ratulangi to this place. Then they identify and find 13 crew members. These people say they wanted to reach the factory in Bangladesh to repair Sam Ratulangi. Another vessel helped tow the ship, but then 2 cables tore off, and a storm began. No one wanted to stay on board during such weather, so the crew members left it. No one knows what the ship has been doing for the last 9 years, and how it was possible without people on board. And here's another, much more mysterious ship story. On February 16, 2020, locals found a large cargo ship stuck on a rocky shore off the coast of an Irish village. The boat looked rusty, with holes in the hull and rotten parts. People hadn't seen this vessel the day before, so it appeared there at night. The last time people saw the Alta cargo ship was a few months earlier, thousands of miles off the coast of Ireland. That day, the Alta was sailing in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Another ship, the MS Protector, noticed it. MS Protector crew members tried to contact the ship, but received no response. The people on board realized that they were facing an empty vessel. And then, 5 months later, it appeared near the coast of Ireland. There are more questions than answers in this story, but we managed to find something out. In 2015, the Alta appeared and disappeared from the radar several times. Any ship has an internal tracking system, so people can track its route using satellites. But Alta crew members often disabled this system. Perhaps they were engaged in some illegal activity. Anyway, in 2017, the ship often sailed between the ports of Greek islands. Then, the tracking signal disappeared and appeared only 10 months later, off the coast of North Africa. During this time, the ship changed several flags. In September 2018, the Alta was southeast of Bermuda and headed for Haiti. Then, the crew started facing problems. First, the main engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The ship began to drift. Several days passed, but the crew members weren't able to repair it. They began to run out of food and water supplies. The situation got even worse when they found out that a hurricane was approaching the place. Fortunately, they managed to contact the U.S. Coast Guard. A helicopter flew to the Alta on October 2nd to bring them some supplies. There was enough food for several days. Then, a rescue boat sailed to the ship. It evacuated all the sailors and delivered them to Puerto Rico before the hurricane. The Alta had to drift alone in the ocean. After a while, another ship approached the Alta to tow it to the shores of Guyana. But at this moment, everything went wrong. Someone stole the boat, disabled the tracking system, and sailed away in an unknown direction. After almost a year, the MS Protector found the empty Alta in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And then, 9 months later, the ship without a crew sailed to the shores of Ireland. How did it manage to travel across the Atlantic and get to the coast of Ireland? It's still a mystery. Maybe it was just luck. No one else saw the ship all this time. It was just covering huge distances, surviving storms. Who's the captain? What happened to the thieves? Who owns the ship now? One day, someone called the village administration and introduced themselves as the vessel owner. But that unknown person didn't provide any evidence. They found several barrels of oil on the ship, which they took away by helicopter. The Alta was rusting. Corrosion of metal could damage the environment. The vessel had no commercial value, yet it would have taken millions to get rid of it. There were 3 options for what to do: leave the ship where it was, tow it into the sea and let it sink, or disassemble it for scrap. But nature had its own plans. Storms and strong waves split the hull into two parts. The Alta was drifting without a crew in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean for about 2 years. But this is nothing compared to a ship that was traveling for 38 years. The record belongs to the SS Baychimo. It was a merchant vessel owned by some trading company. In 1931, the ship found itself on the ice off the coast of Alaska. Its movement slowed down. A thick layer of ice blocked the ship, and a strong storm only made the situation worse. The blizzard was so intense that the crew members couldn't see anything but a white veil in front of their eyes. Sailing any further was impossible. The team had to wait for the storm to end. They waited for a day, 2, 3 days. A week had passed, but the snowstorm was only getting stronger. Then, one day, it grew weaker. The crew members split into 2 teams. The first team went to the nearest city. The second group, along with the captain, stayed on board. They set up camp next to the ship and waited for the blizzard, which had started again, to end. There was zero visibility. And finally, one day, the storm was over. Great! And now, wait a minute. But where is the ship? The SS Baychimo just disappeared during the blizzard. The captain was sure that the ship had sunk, so he left along with the crew. Then, a week later, they saw the vessel drifting near the area where they had lost it. The hull was damaged so severely that it was unsafe to sail on it. Repairing the ship would be pointless and expensive, so the captain decided to abandon it. He was sure that it would go underwater sooner or later, but it stayed afloat for the next few days, the next few months, and a few years. People had reported seeing it at various points along the coast of Alaska for 38 years. The last record of the SS Baychimo is dated 1969. Those who saw it claimed the ship was completely frozen, almost merged with the ice. Some people planned to start an expedition to find the ship, but all attempts were unsuccessful. The vessel is probably lying somewhere on the deep sea floor.
It has recently become a popular location for many tourists looking for the perfect place to get away from it all. If you're lucky enough to catch a sunny day here, it's like no other, I can assure you. Chances are, you'll end up having loads of foggy days, but let's be honest, they have a special allure of their own. This enchanting smile-shaped island is called Sable Island. It's located 190 miles from mainland Nova Scotia. It wasn't accessible to the general public until 2013. That's when it was added to the list of National Parks of Canada. You can get here either by plane or by water. But what's so enchanting about this place anyway? There must be something since the yearly tourist count is growing every year. Firstly, there's a spectacular number of wild horses here. There are between 200 and 500 horses roaming free all over the island. There's also a large population of gray seals. The place is also the only breeding location of a rare bird species called the Ipswich sparrow. If you're already considering a trip here, there are some things you need to know first. Remember that fog I mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out that Sable Island is the foggiest place in the Canadian Maritimes. I'm talking about approximately 127 foggy days each year. During such days, Sable Island literally disappears underneath a thick layer of fog. You won't be able to explore the place on your own either. The local regulations state that visitors need to travel within a group, and they also need to keep a 197-foot distance from the wildlife they can encounter here. As charming as this place may be, it holds a dark secret hidden beneath the sandy dunes, and it has nothing to do with beautiful creatures living here or the island's unique vegetation. Apart from being known from its horses and seals, Sable Island is infamous for an overwhelming number of shipwrecks. Over the years, about 350 ships have ended their lives here, on these sandbars. When survivors described their experiences, they usually mentioned harsh weather conditions near this mysterious island. The island also made its way into literature when it was described in a book called The Perfect Storm, which was written by Sebastian Junger and published in 1997. The book was so successful that it was later adapted for the big screen in 2000, with George Clooney playing the leading role. The first recorded shipwreck near Sable Island dates back to 1583. The boat was named the HMS Delight and was under the command of British adventurer and explorer Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Only 17 people managed to survive the catastrophe by escaping in a small boat. Records mention that they spent 7 days at sea before reaching the shores of Newfoundland. In 1884, another vessel named the Nicosia struggled in the thick fog as well. The ship was completely destroyed, but fortunately, all 18 crew members managed to survive. The captain's son was almost lost at sea when a lifeboat capsized when he was climbing into it. He somehow managed to stay underneath the lifeboat, which was completely submerged. When this lifeboat righted, he eventually emerged from the water and was rescued for the second time. The years between 1947 and 1999 were relatively quiet on the island. In 1999, though, a yacht called the Merrimack ran aground near the shore of the island at about 2 a.m. on July 27th. The 40-foot fiberglass boat had a crew of only 3 people. Natural gas exploration workers, who were luckily not far away, rescued them. The crew managed to fly safely to Halifax the next day. The owner of the Merrimack tried to recover his boat by hiring local fishermen. Unfortunately, this operation was unsuccessful, since only the fittings of the yacht were eventually saved. It took no more than 6 weeks for the sand and waves to crush and completely break up the hull of the Merrimack. So what is it about this place that's so dangerous for boats? Does it have anything to do with the weather? Or maybe there's other forces at play? The explanation turns out to be a bit more complex, and it wasn't easy to figure out, at least not way back in the 1500s. First of all, the island is located close to one of the world's richest fishing grounds. Since it's also near one of the major shipping routes between Europe and North America, hundreds of vessels sail past it each year. The likelihood of shipwreck increases when there are so many boats roaming around the area. Sable Island is also in the way of most of the storms that move up the Atlantic coast of North America. It's no surprise that boats often get hurtled straight onto the shores of this island. The weather has a lot to do with it too. During the summer season, the warm air from the Gulf Stream creates a dense fog as it merges with the cool air by the Labrador Current that passes by the island. Other currents don't help the matter. Sable Island is next to the meeting point of 3 major ocean currents: the Gulf Stream, the Labrador Current, and the Belle Isle Current. Since the 1950s, radars and other modern navigation tools have been used on commercial vessels as well. Up until then, the sextant was the main instrument used to figure out a ship's location. It doesn't mean that sextants weren't accurate, but this instrument couldn't work properly without a clear view of the sun or stars, which means it didn't help much in dense fog, such as the one surrounding Sable Island, or when it was cloudy. Often during bad weather, the captain of a ship navigated, relying on their experiences and intuition based on the ship's speed and direction. That's why most of the survivors in shipwrecks near Sable Island said that the captain had simply miscalculated the ship's position, crashing into Sable Island by accident. This dusty, sandy land is as unfriendly to ships as it is to trees. There's reportedly a single tree on the whole island, and it looks a lot more like a bush. It's actually a pine tree. And since the famous island horses don't see it as much of a food source, it somehow managed to survive. Reports say that the tree was planted back in the 1950s. Local authorities were trying to grow a forest on the island to make it a bit more welcoming. They've planted tens of thousands of trees over the years, more than 69,000 evergreens, 600 fruit trees, and about 55 pounds of pine seeds, along with other plants which could survive the conditions on the island. But they were no match for the extreme weather and sandy soil. Out of all those plants, just one pine tree is still alive. Thanks to its resistance, it has even become a symbol of Sable Island. Interestingly, for around 40 years, the island also had just one inhabitant. Can you imagine that? One person living on a remote island for so many decades? It's the story of a woman called Zoe Lucas. She chose to surround herself with the only residents on the island: the horses, the gray seals, and the many species of birds. An esteemed naturalist, she mentioned in an interview she gave back in 2017 that she was used to living on the island and that she never got lonely. To survive here, she had to put together an essentials kit. It included a notebook to take notes and a pair of binoculars to study the wildlife. You can safely assume she wasn't scared of the intimidating surroundings, since she decided to eventually call this place home. At first, Zoe wanted to set up camp on one end of the island, near some abandoned buildings. But eventually, she settled in a wooden house near a bunch of sand dunes. A Canadian institution called the Meteorological Service of Canada put together the simple construction back in the 1940s. Parks Canada operates the building these days. Zoe's work included gathering as much data on the local horse population as possible. It could help scientists better understand how they managed to adapt to the unfriendly environment. She also helped gather the debris that made it to the shore to help track pollution levels. Among all the rubbish that she collected, there was a refrigerator and a crate full of fresh peppers. Some other specialists eventually started working rotating shifts on Sable Island to offer the brave woman a little bit of company now and then. Thick fog is rising over the ocean as the sun is slowly sinking towards the horizon. It's hard to see further away than a few dozen feet, but that's enough to notice a hulking, skeletal shape in the distance. As your ship approaches the figure, your heart beats faster, and then you make out the details of another vessel, abandoned by the looks of it. Ghost ships do exist, and their mysteries aren't always solved. Take MV Joyita, for example. It was a wooden vessel built in 1931 as a luxury yacht. It had served well to various people over 20 years before it was bought by a Samoan sailor and became a merchant ship. In 1955, though, Joyita's service came to an abrupt and mysterious end. On October 3rd, it set sail for another trading voyage that should have taken no more than 48 hours. Delays happen in the sea, so when Joyita didn't arrive on October 5th as scheduled, there was little worry yet. But then it failed to come on the following day too. There was no distress signal or any other sign of Joyita's presence anywhere between its departure and arrival points. A search and rescue party was dispatched to find the ship, and for 6 days, they were scouting the area of nearly 100,000 square miles. On October 12th, the mission returned to the base empty-handed. Joyita vanished without a trace. It was only a month later that another merchant ship, Tuvalu, noticed the missing vessel far away from its route, drifting in the open sea and listing heavily. The sailors boarded the ship and found that all of its crew and passengers, 25 people total, were missing, along with all the cargo the vessel had been carrying. The radio was tuned to the International Distress Channel, meaning that the crew had been trying to ask for help, but they couldn't reach anyone because the radio cable had been damaged, limiting the range to 2 miles. The lifeboats were missing as well, indicating that people on board must have left the ship. Unfortunately, they seem to have taken the logbook with them, leaving the rescue team clueless as to what had happened. Even today, the mystery of MV Joyita hasn't been solved yet. No one knows where the crew and passengers had gone and what had caused them to leave. SV Carol A. Deering wasn't a ghost ship in the usual sense of the word. There are no sightings of it in the open sea. Instead, it was found on the shore, but the circumstances of it running aground are a puzzle shrouded in mystery. Carol A. Deering was built in 1919 in Maine, and it was a large vessel made for commercial voyages. Unfortunately, despite its large cost of construction, it had only served for a year before its last trip. July 19, 1920. The ship was traveling from Puerto Rico to Rio de Janeiro via Newport News to deliver a cargo of coal. It was almost halfway to the final destination when the captain fell seriously ill, and the crew turned back to drop him and his son off and replace the captain. The voyage went without incident, but when it came to Barbados in December to resupply, there were strange moods among the crew. The first mate didn't seem to be happy with the new captain. No one paid much attention to it back then, when they probably should have. The last sighting of Carol A. Deering at sea was on January 28, 1921, when a lightship noticed it off the coast of North Carolina. There was some commotion on the quarterdeck of the ship, where the crew were normally not allowed. Then, another vessel sighted it, but there was already no one on the decks. On January 31st, the merchant ship was found hard aground in the Diamond Shoals, a site notorious for numerous shipwrecks that had been occupying there for centuries. When the search and rescue party boarded the ship, they found it abandoned, the log and personal belongings of the crew gone, along with the 2 lifeboats. There is still no answer to what happened on board of Carol A. Deering that January, although the most popular version was mutiny. Maybe we'll never find out the truth though. SS Baychimo is perhaps one of the most notable ghost ships in history. This large cargo steamer was built in 1914 in Sweden and plodded its way dutifully over 16 years, trading provisions for pelts with native tribes of Alaska and Canada. But then, on October 1st, 1931, Baychimo got caught in pack ice. At first, it seemed the crew would be able to wait it out and continue on their route because the ship broke free in a couple of days. But in less than a week, it became caught again, this time for good. In another week, a rescue party was sent to fetch 22 of the Baychimo's crew, while another 15 remained behind to wait through the winter if necessary and get the ship back. But a month later, after a powerful blizzard struck their camp, the sailors went out of their shelters only to find the ship gone. Luckily, a few days later, a native hunter told that Baychimo hadn't been lost yet. He'd seen it about 45 miles from where they had been stationed. They managed to track it down, but decided the ship wouldn't survive the winter. So they took the most valuable cargo from its hold and abandoned it. They were wrong though. SS Baychimo did survive that winter, and many more that followed. When the ice broke, it sailed away on its own, drifting listlessly along the shores of Canada and Alaska. There were numerous sightings of the ghost ship, sometimes adrift in the open sea, and at other times stuck in the pack ice again. People attempted to board and salvage it, but weather conditions or lack of equipment always prevented them. SS Baychimo was last sighted by native Alaskans in 1969, 38 years after its abandonment. What became of it later remains unknown. The story of SS Ourang Medan is one of the most puzzling and harrowing ghost ship stories of the 20th century. No one even knows for sure if the ship even existed in the first place. It wasn't recorded in Lloyd's Shipping, the International Register of Ships, which makes it either a tall tale or a vessel that avoided being officially recognized for some shady reasons. In any case, the accounts as to what happened to the Medan vary. According to most reports, it was carrying some unknown cargo in the Indonesian waters when a distress call was received by another ship in the vicinity. The officer on duty heard an SOS message, but its contents are different depending on the accounts. The message did not repeat, and the crew of Medan didn't answer to any attempts to contact it back. The ship that received the distress call hurried to the rescue, but they only reached the vessel the following day, when it was already drifting and slightly listing. When the rescuers boarded the ship, they found that none of the crew had survived. However, one lifeboat was missing, which implied that there was at least one crew member who managed to escape. What happened to the rest of the people on board remains a mystery to this day. Still, there are no hard facts about this story, so we might never find out whether SS Ourang Medan was actually a ship and not a thing of fiction. SV Zebrina was a 3-mast sailing barge built in 1873 for river trade ships in South America. She served for well over 4 decades, proving to be a sturdy and reliable ship. It was later transferred to Europe, where it continued serving its purpose well. But then, in October 1917, Zebrina set sail on a regular voyage only to be found ashore several days later. Mysteriously, although the ship was perfectly intact, the entire crew of 5 and the captain were gone. There is no direct evidence or hard facts as to what really happened that day. The most convincing theory is that the crew were washed away from the deck because of an underwater explosion. And then the ship sailed ahead without them, but the truth, as always, remains unknown.
Welcome to the Spirit of Discovery cruise ship, which will take you on an unforgettable sea voyage around the Canary Islands. The azure endless ocean, delicious food, the highest service, premium cabins, and a terrible nightmare that you will probably remember for the rest of your life. This is exactly how one luxury trip of the Saga Cruises Company ended last year. Instead of relaxing during the cruise, passengers felt fear and horror, and even had health problems. And that's why. On October 24th, the Spirit of Discovery liner started a 2-week cruise around the Canary Islands. There were about 1,500 people on board. About 1,000 were passengers, and the rest were crew members. The first week went great, but then the liner encountered a serious problem called nature. There were strong winds and big waves. The captain decided to return to the UK ahead of time, but the decision was made too late. The ship was caught in a severe storm in the Bay of Biscay. A powerful wind with a force of 11 points hit the vessel. To make it easier for you to understand, the 11-point wind is able to tear out trees together with roots, destroy residential buildings, and plunge entire cities into chaos. Such a storm is rare, but Spirit of Discovery was unlucky enough to get into its epicenter. 11 points is the penultimate place on the Beaufort scale, which determines the wind rating. The most powerful storm has 12 points, and this is a hurricane. The wind reached a speed of 65 miles per hour, which is about the same as the average speed of a car on a highway. Not only did it push the Spirit of Discovery, but it also raised huge waves 25 feet high. Just imagine a wall of water the height of a 3-story building collapsing on a lone ocean liner. At that moment, the captain sent a message to all the passengers through the cabin speakers so that no one left their place. And his voice sounded worried enough. All the passengers had to lie down and hold on tight. According to the witnesses' words, the ship remained caught in the storm for about 15 hours. They held on with all their might so as not to crash into the walls and floor. All this time, tables were flying around the ship, dishes were breaking, furniture was moving all over the cabins. The waves smashed windows, partitions, and doors. Some people were knocked down because they couldn't hold on for so long. The storm hurled the passengers from ceiling to floor, from wall to wall. The ship's crew turned the dining room into a medical area to provide assistance to those who had been hurt. Despite the difficult and terrible conditions, the ship's team did a great job. They regularly informed passengers about the current situation and tried to calm everyone down. There was no panic and chaos on board. When the storm finally ended, the ship continued its journey and finally reached land, where medics urgently evacuated 8 passengers to the hospital. One of them was never able to survive this storm. It's good the ship didn't meet a rogue wave during the storm. This is a natural phenomenon that can appear during a storm and even in still water. It's a giant wave with a height of 60 feet. Like a 6-story house, it collapses onto a ship with incredible speed and capsizes it. And then the wave suddenly disappears. This is no joke. A similar wave has been recorded in the Gulf Stream off of Charleston, South Carolina. It's scary to get in its way. Now, let's go back to the past to remember one of the most terrible maritime tragedies. No, we're not talking about the Titanic. We'll talk about the Greek liner Laconia, which set sail from the English port of Southampton on December 19, 1963, with more than 600 people on board. However, just 3 days later, a terrible tragedy happened to the ship in the boundless waters of the Atlantic. At 11 p.m., in the barbershop hall, an electrical malfunction occurred. The problem led to a fire, which quickly spread to other rooms. The crew couldn't cope with it, since the fire was spreading too fast. The ship's team turned on the fire alarm, but there was no command to leave the vessel. Only 2 hours later, the captain ordered the passengers to evacuate. All this time, people were either relaxing in their cabins or enjoying a party in the ballroom. The crew was probably trying to put out the fire without causing panic. However, when the situation became critical, the evacuation began. People panicked and ran to the lifeboats, but many didn't manage to get inside. One of them was John Morris. He survived this catastrophe and shared his memories of how he put his family in a lifeboat while he stayed on board the ship. He didn't even have a life jacket. Since there was nowhere to go, the ship's crew opened a bar so that people could relax a little. However, at that moment, boilers began to explode inside the ship, and it became clear the vessel wouldn't stay afloat for too long. John Morris decided to jump into the water right in his tuxedo. As soon as he was overboard, he grabbed onto a piece of wooden deck cargo and swam as far away from the ship as he could. The giant liner could sink at any moment, and when such a huge object goes down to the seabed, it forms a water funnel that pulls along everything around. Rescuers arrived at the scene sometime later. Fortunately, John Morris's pregnant wife and young son were alive, but his mother-in-law unfortunately didn't survive the disaster, like many other people that day. Of course, after this incident, the Greek Ministry of Merchant Marine initiated a thorough investigation. For 2 years, they collected information from passengers and the captain, studied the technical characteristics of the ship, and eventually came to certain conclusions. According to them, the ship's crew gave the evacuation order too late. Not all passengers were able to get into lifeboats, but half of those boats remained on board because of the chaos that prevailed during the evacuation. Several officers of the liner were accused of negligence, but the captain and his first mate received the most criticism. As for John Morris, he stated that he felt himself under protection that day. Another unusual story happened on a cruise ship relatively recently. Spoiler alert, the ship didn't sink, there was no evacuation, and the weather was good. However, for many passengers, this journey became a real challenge. Imagine that you've been working for a long time and saving up money to go on your dream trip on the Celebrity Mercury cruise ship in the Caribbean. You arrive in South Carolina, from where the ship begins its journey. You get on board, looking forward to a week's rest. At first, everything is fine. People are having fun, chefs are cooking delicious dishes, and beautiful daytime landscapes turn into night parties. But then suddenly, many passengers start throwing up. Someone is in a hurry to go to the toilet, and someone stays and vomits right in the halls. The cruise turns into chaos. More and more people feel terrible because of unknown poisoning. You also visited the restaurant and eaten seafood, but fortunately, the disease has avoided you, which can't be said for more than 400 other passengers. Almost every 1 in 4 people on board face gastrointestinal problems. There were almost 2,000 people, and a quarter of them are in bad condition. Crew members do endless cleaning. They wash the deck, give people nausea pills, and ask them not to leave the cabin till the illness passes. The captain sends several samples ashore to determine what caused the poisoning. Unfortunately, the cruise is already ruined, and all the passengers have unpleasant memories. So the company organizing the trip issues certificates that can be used on future cruises. It's not the most pleasant experience, but it's still better than nothing. Now, imagine if, instead of just feeling sick, people got infected with some kind of bacterium that would turn them into zombies. It would be much more exciting and scary. Now, do you think you could survive on such a ship full of zombies? And how would you do that? Tell me about it in the comments. The year was 1865. It was a boom of migration worldwide, with novel places discovered and new settlements created. Without planes like we have now, a ship was the only way to escape from the old life and journey towards a new, hopefully brighter future. So, a voyage like that was quite a regular thing to do. More than 500 immigrants safely reached Queensland, and the ship was supposed to head back to London sometime later. It was indeed a long journey, but not many people were willing to return to England. After all, they had chosen to come to Australia to create a brand new life. So it was only natural that the ship would come back nearly empty. However, the return trip was still quite lucrative, thanks to the cargo the ship would carry. The amount of produce ready to be shipped was substantial, primarily consisting of wool soaked in arsenic, tallow, and hides. It was 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only could the crew wait out the winter, warm in Australia, while England endured bitter cold, but they also wouldn't waste their time. With the sheer volume of produce to be loaded, it would take them around 3 months to accomplish this task. Reports were circulating that the Fiery Star was almost done loading up, but it turned out that the assessment was a bit too optimistic. To pass the time, Captain Ewell thought it would be a good idea to reach out to the Acclimatization Society and offer to help transport any animals they wanted to send to England on the Fiery Star. He already had some emus and kangaroos on board, but there was still room. The society held a vote, and they were totally on board, pun intended, with Captain Ewell's idea. They figured sending some taligalas would be a great plan. Even though a few of these birds were already in England, the French Society needed a couple, and they could get them shipped there through England. Little did the crew know that all this cargo, all the produce they were willing to sell in England, would ultimately lead to the ship's destruction. Not only was the Fiery Star lost, but most of the people on board did not survive to complete the voyage. March 23rd. That was the day when the ship manifest was finally published. A manifest is a list that details the cargo, passengers, and crew of a ship, plane, or vehicle, primarily for customs officials. This document helps those involved in the transport verify that everyone and everything that was loaded is still on board when the vehicle reaches its destination. Once it's published, it means the ship is almost ready to depart. There were 3 possible ways of passenger accommodation. First, there was the saloon, the antiquated name for first class. Next, there was the second cabin, which is, logically, second class. Finally, there was the steerage, the cheapest form of passenger accommodation on a ship. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, many people traveled from their homelands, often to North America and Australia, looking for a fresh start. Most of them were poor and had limited funds for travel. In total, there were 8 people in the saloon, another 8 in the second cabin, and only 21 steerage passengers. Out of the 37 passengers, only one, John Ormond, would make it out alive. He bought a ticket for the steerage, so unlike the Titanic situation, in this case, the class didn't really matter. The crew members list wasn't as detailed as the passengers. It was known that, in total, there were around 55 people in the crew, from able-bodied seamen to crew members simply called boys. But there's something telling me that the crew wasn't really that important for the captain. In reality, all that mattered to him was to make as much money as possible, shipping tons of dangerous, flammable cargo. Out of over 50 crew members, only 17 survived that voyage. But there was actually one more crew member who actually survived it all, just because they weren't let in. Sarah Johnson disguised herself as a man and planned to sneak onto the ship. However, something about her looks made the captain get suspicious, so he called the police and made Sarah leave the ship as he didn't want any immoral behavior to take place. Well, he saved her life. For him, it was the last voyage. The captain, W. Hunter Ewell, was quite a celebrity apparently. He already had a record of the safe landing of immigrants in the previous year, so there seemingly was no reason to worry. The trip promised to be safe. Clipper Fiery Star left Moreton Bay bound for London. The passengers took their places. The cargo had already been loaded. The full list is astonishing. In addition to all the wool, tallow, cotton, hides, and horns, there were also 6 cases of arrowroot and various other packages. And we can't forget the animals the captain took aboard too. The Fiery Star was far away, yet still observable to the east as it headed toward the Pacific Ocean. This was the last information available until May 26, when news of its destruction emerged from Brisbane. Chief Officer William Sargent's log reveals that the Fiery Star took 12 days to reach the southern tip of New Zealand, passing on April 11, 1865. The trip was going well until heavy seas ruined 2 longboats on April 17th. On this day, a strong odor of smoke alerted the captain. When he checked, he found the lower hold completely filled with smoke from a fire fueled by the ship's flammable cargo. The hatches were quickly closed to try to contain the flames, but by the next day, the heat and toxic smoke had forced passengers out of their cabins. George Maber was one of the lucky survivors. He was the ship's engineer, and he recalled the chaotic events on April 20th, as Captain Ewell and most of the crew and passengers tried to evacuate in rough weather. At around 6 p.m., the ship took on water, and without much warning, Captain Ewell, 4 crew members, and a few female passengers hopped into a lifeboat and headed out. The next boat, managed by the second mate, Mr. Adio, was a gig, followed by a crowded jolly boat. Lastly, there was a waste boat, which was barely seaworthy, with 2 men constantly bailing water to keep it afloat. The plan was for the boats to stay close to the Fiery Star overnight and head for the Chatham Islands the next morning. But by dawn on April 21st, all 4 boats had vanished without a trace. On the burning ship, there were 17 crew members and passenger John Oman, who banded together under Chief Officer William Sargent's leadership. For 5 days and nights, George Maber pumped water on the fire without rest. He volunteered to go down the forehatch with a rope around him and a handkerchief over his mouth. He discovered that the foremast had been burned through for about 7 inches, and the port side was severely damaged, resembling an empty shell. Exhausted, he returned for fresh air, but later descended again with Quartermaster Marshall to access a water tank. They couldn't open the lid, and as George crawled over the hides, he felt himself sinking. When they reached the deck, they collapsed from exhaustion. The cargo had been destroyed by smoke and fire, and the heat on the deck was intolerable. The crew survived on limited rations and caged chickens, using every spare piece of wood, including pigsties, for the pumps. Distressed pigs ran wild in the heat. A raft was constructed, but was too weak for the open sea. Sleep was elusive, and the crew had lost everything, with only hopes of reaching land or meeting another ship. Finally, the Dauntless appeared and sent a lifeboat to the Fiery Star. Captain Moore boarded the Fiery Star on May 12th, and after assessing the situation, he agreed that the crew could do no more. They boarded the Dauntless at 4 p.m., witnessing the Fiery Star succumb to flames by 11:30 p.m. It was a narrow escape.
2 sailors were traveling not far from the infamous Bermuda Triangle when they noticed a boat that seemed to be moving by itself. The sails on it were down and the motor wasn't running. One of the men was Matt Rutherford, the first man to ever sail non-stop on his own around North and South America, who has seen a lot during his voyages. But this one was spooky even for him. An awfully abandoned boat that could be hiding scary things inside. Rutherford still decided to approach and inspect the vessel to see if there was someone aboard who needed help. This story happened in 2013, but the sailors waited for 10 years before they published the footage. The ghost ship, which turned out to be named Wolfhound, looked like an upscale one, and it probably cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It seemed like whoever abandoned it was leaving in a rush. There were clothes and other personal belongings all over the main cabin. Some parts of the ceiling had fallen and some drawers had popped open. Rutherford was afraid to open doors in cabins, so he carefully searched the boat step by step, and luckily found no people who would need help. The sailors decided to tow the ghost ship back to Bermuda. It wasn't easy because Wolfhound was bigger and heavier than their boat. After days at sea, the crew was running low on fuel and asked a passing freighter to stop and give them some gas. They kept pulling Wolfhound with just sail power until the tow line got wrapped around the rudder, and they realized they could get stranded in the Bermuda Triangle. So they had to abandon the ship. After another 23 days in the Atlantic, they finally reached Bermuda. As it turned out later, the mysterious ghost ship belonged to an Irish yacht club member. It got caught in a storm with waves that were 20 feet high and super strong winds, and couldn't continue its voyage. A Greek cargo ship rescued the crew, but they had to leave the ship. Rutherford and his crew found the yacht 9 weeks later. Wolfhound is one of more than 50 ships and 20 planes that disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle since the mid-19th century. The first ship, at least officially documented, was the USS Pickering. It departed from Delaware to the West Indies in 1800. There were 70 people aboard. No one ever heard anything from them ever since. And perhaps we'll never know what exactly happened to them and where the ship is now. The largest ship that has ever disappeared in this mysterious area is the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, carrying a crew of 306 people, the USS Cyclops left Barbados and headed home to Baltimore. It had tons of dense manganese ore on board, which was used in steelmaking. Something happened during its 9-day voyage when it was passing through the Bermuda Triangle. The last message from Cyclops said, "Weather fair, all well," and then it disappeared forever, without even an SOS signal. Another ship that the Bermuda Triangle supposedly took forever was the Cotopaxi in 1925. It was loaded with coal and had a crew of 32 people on board. Its trip was supposed to go from Charleston, South Carolina to Havana, Cuba, but something went wrong and the ship disappeared. Recently, scientists discovered that the Cotopaxi was lying at the bottom of the ocean about 35 miles from St. Augustine, Florida. Divers who like to go down to the wreck nicknamed this spot the Bear Wreck, but didn't realize they were exploring the remains of the Cotopaxi. One of them, Michael Barnett, was trying to identify the wreck for over 15 years. He carefully measured different parts of the shipwreck that survived underwater with his team. When they compared these measurements with old blueprints of the Cotopaxi, they saw that everything matched up perfectly. The size and position of the boilers were exactly as described in the blueprints. This helped them confirm that they had found the Cotopaxi, and it looks like there was nothing mysterious about its disappearance. It was a combo of bad maintenance, poor care, and rough weather. Many of the hatches used to access the cargo hold where the coal was stored were either broken or missing. This meant that if the ship ran into a storm, water would easily get into the cargo hold, and the ship would get unstable and sink. As the Cotopaxi sailed off the coast of Florida, it met a tropical storm. Just before it disappeared, it sent out a distress call. It was near St. Augustine, so all the puzzle pieces fell into one place. People have come up with all kinds of ideas to explain what might be happening in the Bermuda Triangle. The wildest one is that spaceships from other planets are taking these ships and planes away. Or maybe it has something to do with the lost city of Atlantis, a legendary underwater city. But there are also more rational explanations, such as the fact that this area often has wild and unpredictable weather, with sudden storms and water spouts. For hundreds and hundreds of years, sailors have told stories about giant rogue waves that seem to come out of nowhere in the open ocean. It sounded like a tale in the past, but in the last 20 years, satellites have spotted these freak waves, some of them reaching over 100 feet tall. Storms from the Gulf of Mexico can hit the Bermuda Triangle area and create such rough and unpredictable waves. Scientists built a model of the USS Cyclops and put it in a wave simulator. They say that even a rogue wave 50 feet tall would be enough to flip over that ship. It had a flat bottom and was less stable and more likely to tip. There are also lots of hills and deep valleys on the ocean floor, which can be dangerous if a ship isn't navigating carefully. Sometimes things can go wrong with engines, communication systems, or other equipment. If a plane or ship has a mechanical problem far from land, it can be really hard to get help quickly, especially if rescue teams are far away. The Bermuda Triangle also has magnetic anomalies, so in some parts of it, the compass might point in the wrong direction. And then there are human mistakes, like misjudging distances, making wrong turns, or not listening carefully to directions. This is what happened to Flight 19, a group of planes that went missing. The leader of the flight, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, decided to fly into bad weather without all the equipment they needed. He was also tired, so it was really hard for him to make good decisions. Disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle don't really happen more often than in other parts of the Atlantic Ocean, where a lot of ships and planes travel. They just attract more attention and talks. You still won't find the Bermuda Triangle on any map, and it doesn't have official borders. So we might never be able to solve its mystery because we can't be sure it even exists. But maybe we need to be worried about another Bermuda Triangle, the one up in space. This space triangle doesn't make things completely disappear, but it messes with the equipment on the spacecraft, causing glitches and makes things stop working for a while. The Bermuda Triangle of Space, which is more officially known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, is a unique area above the Earth that stretches over parts of South America and Africa, from Chile all the way to Zimbabwe. It sits right where a part of Earth's magnetic shield is weaker than usual. When a satellite passes through this area, thousands of high-energy particles, especially protons, hit every square inch of it every second. To keep satellites safe from this radiation, space agencies often put them in sleep mode when they pass through the SAA. The Hubble Space Telescope passes through the SAA about 10 times a day and spends about 15% of its time in sleep mode because of this anomaly. Even astronauts on the International Space Station, ISS, which also travels near this zone, have to be careful about radiation. Parts of the ISS, like the kitchen and sleeping areas, have extra shielding to protect them.
There's a ship drifting somewhere in the ocean without a crew. The last time someone saw it was over 50 years ago. Its story reminds of that of the Flying Dutchman, a ship that's bound to sail forever and bring disaster to whoever sees it at sea. At least the legend says so. Unlike the Flying Dutchman, the SS Baychimo was definitely real and built for a German company in Hamburg and began as an ordinary cargo ship. It was trading supplies between Hamburg and Sweden in the Baltic Sea starting from 1914. It had a strong steam engine and a hull made of steel. A few years later, it became British property. Then, in the 1920s, a Canadian company purchased it for around $18,000, a huge amount of money back then. The new owner, the Hudson's Bay Company, was actively using the ship for several years. They would often send it on voyages from its home port in Scotland to Siberia, Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. It also passed through the Panama Canal and even the Suez Canal, with fur pelts for sale on board. Sometimes it would also transport passengers. It had completed 9 successful voyages before this strip of good luck came to an end. Starting from the 1930s, SS Baychimo would have trouble with ice and storms. When it first got trapped in ice in October of 1931, some of the crew managed to escape to Alaska. 15 of 22 sailors decided to stay with their vessel and try to save it. They had furs and other valuable cargo worth around $58,000 aboard. The company sent them supplies to survive the winter. They set camp near the ship out of the hatches, tarpaulins, and other materials, and offloaded the cargo. At the end of November, a blizzard rushed through the area, and it seemed like it had taken the ship with it. The ice platform had survived, but the ship broke free. Some of the crew members were sure it had sunk. But soon after, they heard from one of the locals who had spotted their ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew moved on with their lives, and the ship started its journey as a runaway vessel. People would spot SS Baychimo once a year or so, all the way until 1965. It was mostly spotted off the coast of Alaska. A man going to Nome with his sled dog, along with prospectors, explorers, and treasure hunters, all claimed to have seen SS Baychimo. Someone tried to board it and take it to port, but ended up stranded on it for days because of horrible weather. Others got luckier and managed to take a whaleboat, some furniture, and other valuables from the vessel. Those who got close to the ship saw that it was damaged and missing the propeller. Still, it stayed afloat without a crew for at least 38 years and became the longest sailing ghost ship in history. In 2006, the Alaskan authorities started a project to solve the mystery of this ghost ship of the Arctic and finally find SS Baychimo, either still above or below the water. So far, the project has not been a success. SS Baychimo remains one of the estimated 4,000 ships that have disappeared off Alaskan shores. If the legend of the 17th century isn't lying, this ghost ship could be sailing somewhere along the Flying Dutchman. It belonged to the Dutch East India Company. Its captain managed to do the impossible for that time and sailed from Holland to Indonesia in only 3 months. They said he was flying over the sea, and some evil tongues explained that he had made a deal with evil forces to achieve that. Once the ship was sailing back home, its captain and crew disappeared without a trace. There are many versions of what happened to it. One of the first ones said it had tried to enter port at the Cape of Good Hope, got in a terrible storm, and sank as there was no captain to save it. Another legend says the captain had refused to obey the skies to let the ship sink during the storm. A scary life form then struck the boat and the crew, and it was condemned to forever wander without rest. Many sailors claim to have spotted the wandering Dutchman. The Duke of York, who was to become King of England, mentioned having seen it in Australian waters. Right after spotting the ship, the man who saw it first fell from the top of the mast and didn't survive. There were more encounters with this legendary ship up to the middle of the 20th century. Ships would nearly collide with it as the Flying Dutchman jumped out of the blue. Scientists have a more logical explanation for this mystery: Fata Morgana, not to be confused with Hakuna Matata. Now, when you're out at sea on a hot day and the air is all wavy, it feels like when you look at the road on a scorching summer day. That's because of something called atmospheric refraction. When light passes through different layers of air with different temperatures and densities, it bends and twists. Sometimes, under certain conditions, this bending of light can create really bizarre optical illusions over the ocean, like sightings of the Flying Dutchman. The Fata Morgana phenomenon can make distant objects appear distorted, stretched, or even lifted above the horizon. So you can see a ship far away, but because of the way the light is bending, it will look like it's floating above the water or even disappearing and reappearing. A Fata Morgana is most commonly seen in polar regions, especially over large sheets of ice that have a uniform low temperature. But you can see it anywhere, even in deserts and over lakes on hot days. The first stories about ghost ships go all the way back to ancient Greek and Roman mythology. One of the most famous ghost ships in history is the Mary Celeste. This brigantine was traveling from New York City to Genoa and was fully stocked with provisions, but missing a crew when it was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872. The crew's personal belongings were also there, completely undisturbed. The final entry in their log was made 10 days earlier. We still don't know what happened to its crew, and the ship has inspired many spooky stories and legends. The Lady Lovibond was another legendary schooner that is believed to have been wrecked off the coast of Kent in the middle of the 18th century. The story tells that the ship's captain, Simon Reed, had just got married and took his bride on board for a celebratory cruise, despite the superstition that it could bring bad luck. They were on their way to Portugal when the first mate, who is also in love with the captain's new wife, went mad because of jealousy, attacked another crew member, and then took over the wheel and steered the ship straight into the dreaded Goodwin Sands. No one aboard survived, and the schooner is said to reappear as a ghost vessel every 50 years. In present times, many vessels become abandoned and turned into ghost ships intentionally. There are thousands of them floating in U.S. rivers, lakes, channels, and coastal waters. Some people lose their boats in storms and other extreme weather. Others have to abandon their boats because maintaining them can cost 10% of the boat's price. Plus, docking a vessel can add up to several $1,000s every year. Most boats have been made of fiberglass, so an owner can't just recycle them as scrap metal. So, once they want to get rid of it, they often tie it to a dock and sneak away, or leave it floating far away from the shore, or just try to sink it. When ghost ships sink in shallow waters, they can cause damage to coral reefs, mangroves, marshlands, oyster habitats, and wetlands. Plus, they can collide with unsuspecting regular ships and cause real trouble. So, don't do that. Enough said.
What is a boat doing in the middle of a desert? You would expect to find a seagoing vessel closer to shore. This is the question archaeologists had been asking for decades. In 1988, there was a storm near one of the most important archaeological sites in ancient Egypt. A wooden structure emerged from the sand. It was hollowed out by termites. Scientists were determined to solve its mystery. In 2000, they began excavating the site near Abidos, Abidos. An American team of experts soon discovered a boat that was 70 feet long, and it wasn't alone. In total, there were 14 boats neatly resting next to each other. It was impossible to completely dig out the boats because of their poor condition. Luckily, the wood was preserved enough to get a sample. Analyses revealed that the boats were around 5,000 years old, the oldest fleet in human history to this date. The time of their construction predates the pyramids at Giza by half a millennium. Each ship of the fleet rested in a vault that matched its dimensions. The room was roughly a third of the size of a tennis court. It had mud brick walls that featured more than 120 drawings of boats. Ancient Egyptians incised them on whitewashed walls that were excellently preserved. Scientists have known about these mysterious chambers for well over a century. 1901, 1902. A British archaeologist, Arthur Weigel, stumbled upon a strange structure west of the River Nile. His team caught a glimpse of the interior walls. Sadly, a section of the roof collapsed, so they had to call off further exploration. Researchers abandoned the site, but its location remained on the maps. The boat's position first led scientists to think that they rested on a bank of the mighty Nile. But there was a problem with this theory. Today, the river flows almost 7 miles west of Abidos. Further studies of the surrounding terrain showed the Nile didn't change its course throughout history. Also, if the boats floated near a dock, they would be in unstable positions. The 14 vessels at Abidos were perfectly parallel to each other. There was only one conclusion possible. Someone had deliberately placed them like that. They must have gone through a lot of effort. Each boat had enough room for up to 30 rowers. These vessels could really float. They weren't models, but scholars still don't know if they actually sailed any body of water in ancient Egypt. This doesn't diminish the importance of the find. Previously, archaeologists found only small-scale models. In King Tut's tomb alone, there were 35 boat models. For a long time, these figurines were the only clues as to how ancient Egyptian vessels looked like. The boat's design confirms that they were the real deal. They are the earliest surviving examples of something called built boats. Ancient people constructed primitive vessels by hollowing out large tree trunks. The alternative was reed that was tied together to form a raft. The boats at Abidos had planks tied together. This was a major breakthrough in shipbuilding. During their lifetime, the boats must have seemed impressive. Timber was a valuable commodity at the time. There was no wood in the desert. Cedar had to be imported from Lebanon. The only person who could afford such luxury was the pharaoh. Studying the area around the ancient fleet provided more answers. Scientists discovered a mud brick structure where Egyptians worshipped the pharaoh. Its approximate date of construction matches that of the wooden boats. The same bricks out of which this building was made were used to encase the fleet. At the time of their construction, the rooms they were stored in had a ceiling. That's the section that archaeologists stumbled upon in the early 20th century. Just like mummies and coffins, these marvelous ships rested inside splendid vaults. The exterior of these rooms was also impressive. The outer walls originally had a plaster of white limestone. It reflected sunlight. In the desert sun, the structure housing the boats must have shone from miles away. Ancient Egyptian builders used the same technique to cover the pyramids 500 years later. Today, their surface looks jagged, but it wasn't always like this. When they were constructed, the pyramids had a top layer of fine white limestone. Their surface was smooth and it gleamed in the sunlight. Instead of stairs, the outer layer of the pyramids was more of a sleek ramp. Archaeologists were left with one final question. Which pharaoh owned the fleet? The answer lay just a mile from the site. This is where the tomb of a pharaoh from the 5th dynasty rested, King Senwosret III. Its time and style of construction matched the ones of the chambers with boats. The very end of his rule might explain how the boats ended up in the middle of the desert. The pharaoh probably passed away in northern Egypt. Then his body was transported down the Nile to Abidos in a marvelous procession of decorated boats. The vessels were later lowered to chambers near the final resting place of their owner. This had a symbolic meaning. In the ancient Egyptians' belief system, ships played a key role. Their supreme deity was Ra. He traveled through the sky during the day in the form of the sun. At nighttime, he sailed through the netherworld in a solar boat. The pharaoh identified himself with Ra. That's why he needed boats in the afterlife. That was the only way to regenerate himself. Just as the sun rises every day above the horizon. This belief existed for thousands of years. The more famous Pharaoh Khufu also had a ship. Scientists found it in 1954 next to his pyramid at Giza. It is some 4 centuries younger than the fleet at Abidos, but Khufu's ship was almost 2 times longer. The Great Pyramid of Giza and King Tut's tomb are some of the most famous archaeological finds in Egypt. But there are many more secrets hiding beneath the endless sands of the Sahara Desert. Recently, 2020, archaeologists found a lost city there. They have labeled it as the most important discovery since King Tut's tomb, 1922. The city of Aten is some 3,000 years old. Historians hope it will give them a unique insight into the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. The famous archaeologist and Egyptologist Zahi Hawass proclaimed the site a lost golden city. Aten sits some 300 miles south of Egypt's capital, Cairo. It is close to the famous Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists first found sections of mud brick walls that spread out in all directions. They discovered complete rooms with tools of everyday life inside. The research team unearthed a bakery, a residential neighborhood, and an administrative district. They all date back to the time when the Egyptian civilization was the wealthiest in its long history. They were also the first to make objects from iron. In 1911, scientists found a set of iron beads near a village in Lower Egypt, El Gurza. These are the earliest known iron artifacts. The discovery is literally out of this world. Ancient people made them by beating into shape a piece of a meteorite. The 9 beads were once part of an ornate necklace. They are now blackened and corroded, which is perfectly normal for a piece of jewelry that is over 5,000 years old. They consist of an iron-nickel alloy. Researchers were impressed by the skill of ancient jewelers who processed the beads. Their craftsmanship is more impressive when you think that they didn't know the stellar origins of the material. The Great Pyramid of Giza also has a remarkable feature. An international research group investigated the electromagnetic response of the structure to radio waves. They found that the pyramid has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy inside it. This occurred inside its chambers as well as under the pyramid's base. It contains an underground, unfinished chamber. It seems that the electromagnetic response is connected with the properties of limestone, the Great Pyramid's main building material. The research results might have a practical application. The way solar cells and nanosensors function could be improved by this remarkable find.
The sea, this unrelenting water beast, has been defying all attempts to tame it for centuries. Many ships driven by the wind have gone through the harshest parts of the world. Some have survived the struggle with the sea, and many have come off second best. It's the year 1834. A ship called the Pilgrim is setting a course to sail from California to Boston. The journey will venture around South America and then past Cape Horn of Chile. Richard signs up as a merchant seaman aboard the Pilgrim. This is his first voyage at sea. The crew tells Richard stories of the Drake Passage off Cape Horn, a route that's legendary for its dangers. Countless ships and sailors have disappeared in those waters. Since Cape Horn's discovery in 1526, it's quickly become known to all those that have sailed around it as the ultimate test of any mariner's skill and of any ship's strength. Those that have survived the journey call Cape Horn a sailor's nightmare. Jack the helmsman, a salty veteran, steers the ship towards this most dangerous of all routes. Jack has been aboard the Pilgrim since it was first commissioned in 1825. He's passed by the Horn many times, each time learning a different lesson from the tests provided by the sea. The Pilgrim has been refitted since its past voyage a year ago. Richard values Jack's experience, given that it's his first journey at sea. Jack assures Richard of his confidence in the Pilgrim, even though it's just a small wooden brig with 2 masts. Jack's aware that wooden vessels are gradually becoming outdated, replaced by new steam-powered ships. But Jack prefers the maneuverability of the Pilgrim and would take it over the steel ships any day. Richard is excited to be aboard. There's so much to explore in life as a merchant seaman, but the guy struggles to acquire his sea legs on the boat. Forceful winds make the Pilgrim move faster, providing Richard with a quick introduction to life at sea. At the same time, nothing can prepare him for what is to be experienced at Cape Horn. It's the southernmost point of land before Antarctica. The gap between the icy continent and Cape Horn holds the infamous Drake Passage. Approximately 700 miles between Cape Horn and the Antarctic Peninsula. Strong winds provide an uninterrupted, steadfast journey toward the Horn. But, as Jack tells Richard, the winds are more concentrated at the Drake Passage. They create a funneling effect, becoming stronger and more unpredictable. Richard is unsure of what this might mean for the Pilgrim, but understands that there's no easier route to travel around South America. A few days pass. The Pilgrim sails by the many islands that make up the western coast of Chile. Although the sea has been relatively calm, Richard continues to deal with his lack of sea legs. His movements are still not very graceful. The constant, ever-swaying deck rises and falls, and Richard finds it hard to get used to the motion. Random large waves hit the Pilgrim from every angle. The ship is quickly approaching Cape Horn. Richard looks towards great thunderous black clouds in the distance. "Welcome to the Horn," Jack says, half laughing. A wry smile upon his face soon disappears. The man gets serious, knowing what awaits them all. Stronger winds start blowing the sails as the crew scrambles to hang onto the ropes. Richard desperately sets to adjust the aft sails, adjusting for the constant change in strong southerly winds. Jack holds firm at the helm, knowing the importance of his role. He's wary of the swell. It can build very quickly the further south they travel. It's crucial the Pilgrim doesn't venture too close to the Horn when they approach. The great darkness that was in the distance is now all around them, filling the sky in every direction. Blackened clouds throw rain and hail down at the crew as they try to resist the enraged weather. Jack is directed by the captain at the helm, changing the direction of the vessel. The temperature has dropped significantly. Barely keeping the water from his eyes, he turns toward the port side bow to provide his face a brief break from the torment of the wind. Looking out into the distance, the man sees the Horn standing alone, surrounded by mist. It's a haunting sight. He steers the Pilgrim along the face of the Horn, the distance getting shorter. The waves shrink in height since the depths become shallower. But these waves are much steeper, and their angle can cause more damage to the wooden vessel. Jack's unsure how much of these waves the Pilgrim can take before the hull is breached. Richard, still posted at the aft sails, watches the water and icebergs floating by. He's unsure how large they actually are, since they're mostly hidden underwater. But he knows to alert Jack if any get too close. Just one iceberg hitting the Pilgrim will be all that the hull can withstand. Dutifully, he watches over the side and into the distance. Icebergs aren't the only thing to look out for. Rogue waves are common in these seas as well. The connecting Antarctic and Pacific Oceans, mixed with stormy weather, form waves together. This creates much larger rogue waves. Such waves have been known to reach up to 100 feet tall. They can destroy most vessels in their path. It'll surely be the end of the Pilgrim if it comes across a rogue wave. Strong currents adjust the route of the Pilgrim, as though the Horn is trying to lure the ship toward its rocky shallows. Slowly, they are getting pulled closer toward the Horn. Jack is fighting the current at the helm. Spinning the wheel, he strains his body as much as he can. Grunting, he plunges the wheel from the port side to starboard and back again. The captain keeps yelling directions. To a novice, they're extremely confusing. But Jack, a hardened veteran, continues to interpret the directions with ease, steering to readjust their course away from the Horn. The captain orders Richard to assess the hull below the decks. With the level of pounding the Drake Passage has provided so far, it's surely harmed the ship in some way. Richard runs to the deck as another sailor yells something at him, but the noise of the sea makes it difficult to hear. A wave hits the side, flowing onto the deck. Richard manages to hang on to the mast before he's almost swept overboard. The entire front deck seems to be underwater. Hanging on as the water rolls off the sides of the ship and waiting for it to clear, Richard watches the horn slowly go past. Still, it beckons toward the Pilgrim, as though asking for its dues from the crew. The currents are still pulling the ship, while the storm is raging on, with no end of the struggle in sight. The storm is growing ever larger and fiercer. Richard gathers himself to head below and assess the damage. After a slow descent to the lower decks, Richard can finally look over the hull from the ship's quarters. There's no damage from what he can gather. But he's shocked by the depth of the water inside. It's now at waist depth. Cups, amongst other things, float in the water. Even inside the ship, the guy can't escape the waves. Unable to make sense of it all, he stands frozen, listening to the almighty power of Mother Nature outside. The sea roars even more wildly, waves constantly thudding against the hull. It sounds like a somber drumbeat, a slow countdown to the demise of the Pilgrim. Richard forces himself back to the terrors of the above decks, grasping onto the rails to carefully walk the slippery stairs. He leaves the disturbing creaks of the wooden decks. They're soon replaced with the strained sounds of the ropes, the yells of other sailors, and the deafening roar of the sea crashing all around him. Jack is at the helm, focused on his role, still fighting the wind and the waves, even with the addition of ice and frost. It seems that the world around him has set its heart to distract the man from his duty, but Jack pushes on determinedly. For 9 days, the Pilgrim fights the constant changes in stormy weather, facing all kinds of obstacles, but the ship manages to make it through. As they leave the storm behind, the crew sets their course north for their final destination. The sight of the sun peeking through the dark clouds is the most relieving thing Richard has ever experienced. Unfortunately, Richard lost his rations at some stage during the storm. At sea, if your rations are lost, it's your own bad luck. Luckily, Jack is kind enough to share some of his.
Giant container ships are responsible for much of the global trade. Thanks to them, you receive your orders from overseas, sooner or later. But they do have a problem just like any mechanical vessel. They tend to break down. That's where these little bad boys come in. Tugboats are meant to help any stranded vessel that either lost power or sustained any technical or physical damage. Besides being salvage vessels, tugboats also help guide ships when they dock. Since these ships are massive, underline, they require little tugboats to survey the surroundings and help them navigate to dock properly. They also serve as firefighting boats in case a fire breaks loose in the ship. Many of these cargo ships already have a system to stop fires, but tugboats provide extra help in case the fire gets out of control. Many cargo ships pass through below-zero regions like the Arctic and face plenty of obstacles, or icicles. Tugboats to the rescue again. They can make the first move by breaking the ice so that the vehicle can pass through without damaging itself or delaying its course. They also help large ships move through narrow areas. On March 23, 2021, the Ever Given, one of the largest container ships in the world, got stuck in the Suez Canal for 6 days. It froze global shipping of almost $10 billion of trade in a day. The Suez Canal is one of the most important routes for trading, but happens to be quite narrow for its purpose. To put that into perspective, it's like the Empire State Building getting lodged in the middle of a busy freeway. So, if you were wondering why your delivery was late during that month, it's probably because of that incident. The bottom of the ship nearly touched the floor of the canal. In the early morning of March 23rd, the weather was acting up. It was getting worse and worse, with the wind picking up to around 45 miles per hour. Those were some terrible weather conditions for navigation. That should have been the first red flag, but the Canal Authority didn't have a system for monitoring weather conditions or warning ships about them. The captain, Krishnan Kantavel, ignored the signs and decided just to go with it, not knowing the perils and the consequences ahead. The Egyptian pilots that were assisting with the navigation failed to provide proper instructions. As a result, the ship became jammed diagonally, essentially blocking the whole canal. The canal authorities didn't provide tugboats for some reason, which is why it was stuck for 6 days. Things were so bad, they had to bring excavation diggers to remove some land for the ship to properly turn back to normal. So, these little tuggers are really important for world trading to work. The vessels are getting bigger and bigger, with the world depending on import and export more than ever. They're built for going long distances rather than maneuvering in tight spaces and corners. The tugboats are surrounded by a material that won't scratch or damage the vessel, kind of like bumper cars at the carnival. They can either push or pull. But one thing's for sure, more than one is needed to help a ship get back on its aquatic feet. Ships don't have a lot of water passing over the rudder for them to turn quickly, and they risk damaging the engine if they push it too hard. They can either tow it directly or indirectly. The tug is pulling the vessel either in front of it or from side to side. They can also push it from one side to another. These tiny boats are like ants compared to giant ships. Their success secret is that they're floating on the water, which means there's no solid foundation for them to struggle. As a result, pushing and pulling is easy. Many newer tugboats have 2 large diesel-powered engines. There are also some electric models which are good for the environment and still do their job well. Shipping boats in general are better for the environment than trucks and planes, but are slower. Shipping vessels mainly carry food, clothing, electronics, furniture, and my stuff. The biggest ship can carry the Eiffel Tower on its back like it's no big deal, although getting it over to the ship would be. They're 1,000 times more powerful than a regular car. If all the containers in the world were arranged in a pile, it would cover half the planet. If you ever walked on a beach in the 90s and saw what appeared to be a rubber ducky, you weren't dreaming. In 1992, a shipping crate holding 28,000 rubber ducks was lost at sea while journeying from Hong Kong to the U.S. They say it fell off the ship and has been around the world's oceans for more than 20 years. What seemed like a horrible accident that would leave dire consequences for the world's marine ecosystem proved to also be helpful for us to learn and understand the world of plastic pollution and how the ocean currents work. These ducks seem to have had quite the journey when they broke free from their container life. Some reports show they got washed up on the shores of Alaska, South America, Hawaii, Pacific Northwest, Scotland, Australia, and even froze in the Arctic. Rather than making their way to thousands of bathrooms in the U.S., they went rogue and backpacked around the world to see what else lies beyond tiled walls and bubble baths. Many were collected and removed from the seas and oceans, while some are still out there. There are around 2,000 of these duckies circulating in the currents of the North Pacific Gyre. In case you were wondering, that's a place where the currents meet and whirl with one another between Japan, Alaska, Kodiak, and the Aleutian Islands. They've even created a website to track these ducks down with a contact form that lets people inform of one or many ducks they find across the world. But who knows? Maybe we'll never recover every single duck that was lost at sea at the time. This is just one incident out of many. Studies show that at least 2,000 to 10,000 shipping containers are lost at sea every year. Many containers that do slip off and fall into the sea don't always sink to the bottom. They're floaters. On the downside, they don't float high enough to become colorful islands that are easy to notice. They float like icebergs, with just the top of the container showing, which means that any passing ship or boat won't see it from above. If they pass through it, then significant damage can happen to the ship. They can't stay floating forever, so they end up sinking after many days of being suspended in the open water. Some people have even seen shipping containers washed up on shore after being stranded at sea. These bad boys have been made to last for a very long time. If you take proper care of them, the life expectancy of each container can stretch for more than 20 years. It's pretty amazing that they travel all over the world and are filled and refilled with new items many times. They go through all sorts of weather conditions and have to survive in different climates. Many modern houses are made out of retired shipping containers designed with a nice aesthetic touch. Shipping container houses provide the exact same living conditions, except they look cool. Besides looking cool, they're economically friendly compared to regular houses. You can save plenty of money with the structure pretty much halfway done. All that's needed is just a little foundation and a few adjustments here and there. And boom, you've got yourself a house. You're also doing the world a favor by contributing to the environment. Those homes are recycled containers that have just been refurbished and polished for anyone to live in. They're good enough to live in freezing conditions and scorching weather. The industry is booming, so you can have your new home delivered to you within 10 weeks. You can customize it before they build it for you. It's easy to transport since it's not heavy, it's just bulky. You can predict your cost without the surprise payments that might follow. Many of these containers start their journey in a steel yard and travel all over the world. And in the end, they retire in a nice piece of land and host families that will get to be a part of their history. Wow, I can hardly contain myself. Welcome to the race across the globe. And here are our competitors. He is the captain of the world's largest freight ship, which can hold almost 24,000 containers. This is the captain of the Antonov AN-225 Maria, the world's largest cargo airplane, the record holder in aviation, which uses 6 engines to take off. Over here is the freight engineer. The train reaches a length of about 2.5 miles. That is, the walk from the head of the train to its tail will take a whole hour. And our last contestant is the driver of the Kenworth W990, one of the world's largest and most powerful trucks. All of them will make a crazy trek from the port of Shanghai to Portugal. They will move through water, air, roads, and rails to bring you that container of delicious fruit to your table, or at least to your local store. You take it the last mile. So, here we go! Shanghai. It's the busiest port in the world. Every year, 43,300,000 containers load and unload here. And here's your container. This is a standard 20-foot equivalent unit. There are several kinds of containers, and they're the same all over the planet. These things have changed our world and brought a real revolution in cargo shipping. Way back, 70 years ago, goods and products, or cargo, was loaded and unloaded onto ships with human power. The loaders had to move every individual bag and box, and it would take days to fill up a ship. A truck driver waiting in a long line for his turn to load stuff on a ship thought, what if we didn't move the cargo separately, but could put a whole truck onto the ship? Ooh, he's thinking on the bright side. Well, a few decades later, the first container appeared. Now the loader in the port didn't have to spend time moving every single piece of cargo. A giant crane would hoist an entire loaded container all at once. Then, in 1956, this reduced the cost of loading 1 ton of freight from $6 to 16 cents, 37 times. You can fit 2 cars in one of those containers, or 3,500 shoeboxes, or 500,000 chicken eggs. There's also containers for bulk goods like grain. They have an airlock at the bottom. There's also refrigerated containers. They're used to deliver fruit to all corners of our planet. The invention of these standard containers made the shipping industry way more efficient. Let's return to our present day. This real-time map shows all the ships in the world's oceans. See how the port of Shanghai glows? Dozens of ships unload and load containers here every day. The total fleet of these giant container ships is about 5,400 units worldwide. And here's our hero vessel. This big boy is 1,300 feet long. Its nose is 330 feet higher than the Eiffel Tower. Its engine measures as tall as a 5-story building. Right now, dozens of cranes are loading containers inside the ship. Then they put a lid on the hold and stack even more containers on the deck. The maximum is 23,992 containers. Their total weight can be about 235,580 tons. That's like, 39,000 adult elephants. That's if you do the math. To move all this mass, its giant engine has about 78,500 horsepower. The fastest commercial car, the Koenigsegg Agera RS, made in Sweden, has only 1,341 horsepower, so that's not nearly enough. Now, you'd think it would take a huge team to drive such a giant, right? Nope, no more than 20 people. This is the captain. Several assistant captains oversee each deck: the engine crew, the helmspersons, and the tech crew. And the most important people on the ship? The cook and his assistant. Hey, you gotta keep that crew happy, right? The captain orders "start the engines," and the crew gets to work. Tugboats help the colossal container ship slip out into the bay. Meanwhile, we're loading the world's largest cargo airplane at Shanghai Airport, AN-225 Mira. Check this out. The first flight of the Wright brothers airplane was shorter than the size of this plane's cargo compartment. Wow! Its fuselage is as long as the height of a 15-story building, and the wingspan is as wide as 6 school buses are long. This plane was originally designed to launch spaceships from the air. It would take off from the runway, carrying the spaceship on its back. Here, we load the plane through the front. The nose of the aircraft rises, opening the cargo hold. At the same time, the airplane squats on its landing gear. The largest airplane in the world can take no more than 7 20-foot containers into the cargo area. The nose closes, and the pilot gives the crew the cue to get going. Usually, even the largest commercial airliners are flown by only 2 people. But the AN-225 Mira needs a 6-person crew. A commander, co-pilot, 2 flight engineers, a navigator, and a radio operator. No cook, huh? Whatever. It's time to start all 6 engines. Each of them generates 12,500 horsepower at liftoff. The airplane accelerates more and more, and at last, all 32 wheels come off the runway. And the fastest commercial car, Koenigsegg Algira RS, is left in the dust. Alright now, let's look at our train. Oh, it's already on its way. The workers have loaded the train with containers right at the port. They just put the containers on a special car, which is the right size. If there are no low tunnels on the track, we can even stack containers, one on top of the other. Given that our train has about 250 cars, we could load 500 containers on it. Now, if we pencil that out, the maximum loading capacity of the train is 48 times less than that of the ship. But the crew that runs the train consists of just 2 people. This makes train deliveries incredibly cheap. But both crew members have a working day. After 12 hours on the road, the train stops at a station. A new crew takes their seats in the train's locomotive and continues on their way. The first crew spends the night in a hotel, has a nice dinner, and in the morning swaps crews with another train heading back to their hometown. Now, let's look at the map. This is the entire distance the train will have to travel, almost 7,000 miles. That's 3 times the width of the United States from coast to coast. On average, freight trains travel at about 50 miles per hour. Our calculator tells us the whole trip will take about 140 hours or 6 days. But hey, it's not that simple. You see, areas are divided into railroad zones. One crew always works within one particular zone. For example, our train crew departed from the port of Shanghai and reached the border of their area. They must stop the train and give up control to the next crew. So, the travel time for the train will depend on the speed of the transfers and the number of stops. So what about our truck? Back at the Shanghai port, the truck got its container very quickly. It pulled up to the loading area, and a big crane gently dropped the container on it directly from the ship. Done. Much faster than a plane or a train. From this point on, its journey began. The truck's route will be about the same as the train's. The average speed of the truck is about 60 miles per hour. If driving non-stop, the journey would take 5 days. But one driver can only work a certain number of hours. A working day lasts 14 hours, of which the truck can only drive 9. When he has reached his limit, the truck driver must find a suitable place to rest and recuperate. You've probably seen the trucker parking lots along the highway. They look like big gas stations. Here, the driver can always take a shower and eat. The driver will sleep right in the truck. The Kenworth W990 has a special place for this right behind the driver's cab. And there's not only a bed there, no, there's separate air conditioning, windows, lights, and several compartments for personal belongings. There's a refrigerator to store groceries and a microwave to heat food. The driver can eat at the folding table and even watch TV. Everything to make the driver feel at home. So, when one driver has reached its limit of 9 hours and his workday is over, he has to rest for the remaining 10 hours until tomorrow. In this case, he'll cover a maximum of 540 miles per day. That adds up to 13 days of travel time. Additionally, the truck must pass inspection when entering other countries or states. Inspectors weigh the truck on giant scales, check its brakes, and more. It's time-consuming too. In this case, the solution is to have a partner. At the end of a 14-hour shift, the first driver must go to the cab to sleep and rest. Then the partner takes over control and continues on the road for the next 14 hours. But there's a problem here. When the second driver finishes his shift, the first driver still can't get behind the wheel, so they still have to stop. Shifting gears, back to our giant container ship. It comes out of the bay and suddenly it slows down. Yes, that's all for the economy. The East China Sea is very busy near the port. Dozens of ships are waiting in line to get into port. So the captain gave the order to increase speed so as not to hold up the party. But as the ship entered the open sea, it slowed down to about 20 knots. That's about 23 miles per hour. That's very slow, especially if we look at their route. It's a trip nearly across the globe. The total distance from the port of Shanghai to Portugal by sea is about 11,000 miles. But our ship moves almost non-stop, 24/7. Ideally, it would take 480 hours or 20 days. But there are a few variables out there for a ship on the open seas. Take storms, for example. The ocean can be a rough place. Sometimes the waves there reach great heights, enough to overturn even a ship this big. So the captain heads to the bridge and takes control. The navigator turns the ship's bow into the wave to keep it from overturning the vessel. The bow of the ship rises and rushes into the sky. Once on top, the ship begins to plunge off the wave like a surfer, picking up speed. After a few seconds, the bow hits the water hard, causing a solid splash of water. High and narrow waves can be especially hazardous. Coming down for them, the ship can dive too much underwater, almost like an arrow, and go under. Or worse, it might break in two under its weight. But fortunately, the wise captain overcame the storm and we arrived at the first checkpoint of the voyage. This is the Strait of Malacca. All ships traveling from Asia go through this bottleneck. Otherwise, they would have to make a long detour through Indonesia. The Strait of Malacca is not only narrow, but also shallow. If the ship's depth in the water, or draft, is deeper than 65 feet, it will run aground, and that's not good. That's why we don't build ships bigger than this one. But our giant makes it through and into the Indian Ocean. Now, look up into the sky. The largest aircraft in the world, the AN-225, is now in the air at cruising altitude. That's about 5.6 miles. The planes choose this altitude for several reasons. The atmosphere here is not as dense as below, so the airplane has less air resistance or drag and burns less fuel. Another reason is bad weather, which just doesn't exist here. Thus, neither rain nor snow is a problem for it. Now, given the curvature of the Earth, the direct distance between Shanghai and Portugal is about 6,500 miles. The cruising speed of the AN-225 is 500 miles per hour. That means the plane can cover this distance in just 13 hours, compared to 13 days for our truck. But the aircraft will have to make at least one stop. Considering that such a huge plane can't land at all airports because it needs a long runway, refueling stops should be carefully chosen. The airport in Dubai has a long enough runway so that the AN-225 can land there. The captain begins the descent procedure. Such a heavy plane needs to calculate the weight for landing accurately. If it's too heavy, the plane's landing gear might break and lead to an accident, which really should be avoided. This is why planes sometimes make several circles around the airport to burn any excess fuel. The weight of the remaining fuel can be critical for landing, so the aircraft captain makes sure the tank is properly empty and lands the plane. When empty, the AN-225 Mira can cover a distance of 9,570 miles. That's enough to get from Alaska in North America to the most southern point of South America, or from New York to London and back. But when loaded with cargo, that distance is almost cut in half. The captain lands the plane and brings it to a stop. Time to feed the beast. AN-225 has 13 tanks under the wings. Combined, they hold 300 tons of fuel. It could take a day and a half and several dozen refueling trucks to fill such a behemoth. So, while the plane is paused, the train has a chance to catch up with it in the race. But there's an issue here too. Different countries have different standards for railroad tracks. The track width in China may be different from the track width in the Middle East and Europe. Yep, we have to change the width between the train's wheels to keep going. In the past, we would stop the train completely to do this. Then we would lift it and change the distance of each pair of wheels by hand. Given that one car has 4 pairs of wheels, and we have over 200 cars, well, this process could take forever. We might as well just unload the train entirely and load the containers onto another one. But now, we can adjust the width of the train's wheel sets right on the move. Now, let's get back on the road again. Whew, our driver just flew by. Well, actually just drove by. A truck like this is indeed the king of the road. It measures 300 inches between the front and rear wheels. And if you add the trailer, it's longer than a school bus, 53 feet. Such a big truck has an impressive weight of 18,000 pounds. That's more than a grown elephant, or as big as 4 sedans. Naturally, the truck has a massive 12.9-liter engine. The average sedan has an engine 6 times smaller. It gives the truck about 500 horsepower, so you can easily pull even a hefty load up a steep hill. The main thing is to make sure that you have fuel. Well, aren't we lucky? The Kenworth W990 has a huge 225-gallon fuel tank. That's 20 times bigger than an average passenger car has, or even that Koenigsegg Algira RS. To fill up such a tank, the pump at the gas station has to go for at least 25 minutes. Hope you're not in a hurry. But this truck is pretty efficient. It can go 6.5 miles burning 1 gallon of fuel, so a full tank will allow the truck to make a trip of almost 1,500 miles. Hey, you can cross the United States from coast to coast with just one stop to refuel. On our 7,000-mile route from Shanghai to Portugal, the truck driver will have to make 5 refueling stops. Meanwhile, back at sea, the captain of the largest container ship in the world looks through binoculars and sees land. The crew has reached one of the busiest waterways in the world, the Suez Canal. It's a narrow strip of water that connects the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. It's the shortest route from Asia to Europe. If it were not for the canal, the ships would have to go around all of Africa, adding another 5,000 miles and consuming tons of fuel and lots more days. Now, an alternative ocean route is through the North Sea, but commercial cargo ships use it only in the summer when the ice is melted and there's a lower risk sailing. At colder times of the year, ships need the help of icebreakers. These are large, powerful ships whose sole purpose is to plow through the ice, clearing the way for cargo ships. But icebreaker services are very expensive, which drastically increases the delivery cost. Now, getting through the Suez Canal is not that easy. You can look at the sea traffic in real time. There are dozens and hundreds of ships lined up to go through it. The canal is about 250 feet wide. That means our ship can go through it with a small margin. But our cargo is too heavy, and the ship could run aground. In this case, the ships that work for the Suez Canal come to the rescue. Some of the containers are reloaded onto them. Our ship becomes lighter and no longer runs aground. The captain receives a message that it's his ship's turn. Tugboats help the giant container ship move through the narrow canal. The ship must navigate 100 miles in a narrow canal to reach the Mediterranean Sea. Other ships are moving from Europe to Asia and moving toward it through the canal. There are special places where the canal widens for the boats to bypass each other. There is also a recently built parallel canal. It's wider and it allows larger ships to go through there, and it even allows ships to go both ways. On average, the passage through the canal takes about 14 hours. In one day, the Suez Canal can pass about 50 ships. Hundreds of other vessels on both sides of the canal have to wait in line. The ship's captain keeps a close eye on the passage through the canal. Even the slightest mistake can lead to a massive pileup. In March 2021, one of the largest container ships in the world blocked the Suez Canal. It was carrying about 18,000 containers. Strong winds blew the ship off course as it passed through the canal. The ship's bow ran aground on one side of the canal. Its stern was then blown sideways, beaching on the opposite side. So, this one ship completely blocked the passage from Asia to Europe in both directions. As they say, want to get away? Well, for several days, 14 tugboats tried unsuccessfully to move the giant ship. Then the excavators began to dig out the sand under the ship's bow. Their goal was to deepen the bottom of the canal so the boat could float again. Every minute counted. Meanwhile, more and more ships were bumper to bumper in the Mediterranean and Red Seas. By the end of the rescue operation, roughly 450 different ships were impatiently waiting for their turn to pass through the canal. The world trade lost about $400 million every hour. Delivery schedules for goods around the world flew out the window. The biggest losses were for oil tankers from the Middle East. Fortunately, our captain made no mistakes, and the giant container ship made it through the Suez Canal without incident. The captain sets a new course. This is the last leg of this long voyage. Alright, where's our biggest airplane in the world? It's already slicing through the skies on its finish line. It's now in European airspace. It's interesting that in addition to being a record center in size and payload, this plane is only one of a kind. The first flight of this giant took place in 1988. Although 34 years old, it's still going strong and does its job. It was recently certified to continue flying until at least 2033. It's one of the few planes that have unusual tail fins. It's split. As I said earlier, the AN-225 was originally designed to carry spacecraft on its back, but the spaceship created an aerodynamic instability on the plane's tail. So, the engineers had to give the aircraft a double tail shape. But despite the attachments on the roof of the plane, it never carried cargo there. This is because of the aerodynamic requirements for shipment. When the AN-225 took a spaceship, it had all the properties to reduce air resistance. But if you hitch a square container to the roof of the plane, the aerodynamics will get worse dramatically. Essentially, you get a flying toaster oven. Well, the captain just turned off the autopilot and took control of the plane. This means that he is about to start the descent. Time to put your seatbacks and tray tables into their locked upright position. The appearance of an AN-225 Mira in the air always attracts lots of attention. It can be recognized by its triple track in the sky. This is because of 6 engines and the split tail. The plane lowers the landing gear. All 32 wheels are ready to touch the ground. Cars passing by the airport stop. People get out and pull out their phones to take a video of this giant. 30 feet, 20, 10, and touchdown. The plane slows down and finally stops. Now it's time to get that precious cargo out. It takes about 7 minutes to open the cargo hatch. The plane drops a little lower and unfolds the ramp. The cargo trucks begin unloading the containers. The plane finishes our race. It took 2 days from Shanghai Airport to Portugal with one technical stop for refueling. What about the train? The locomotive of the train has already replaced several dozen crews. Its route took it through Beijing, Moscow, and Paris, but it's still much shorter than the possible longest route in the world, Portugal-Singapore. The total length of the track on this route is 11,655 miles. If you wanted to make this journey by passenger train, it would take about 21 days to get from point A to B. Our train route was a little shorter, and it took 12 days to get to the destination. That's 6 times longer than an airplane. Now to the truck driver. He too is nearly at the finish line. His route practically repeats the ancient Silk Road, the route Chinese merchants used to carry silk to the Middle East. The truck went nose to nose with the train all the way there. The truck would overtake the train when it was stopped to change crews, but the train would pull ahead while the truck driver was asleep in the cab and couldn't continue driving. The truck reached its destination a little later than the train, 13 days. The last participant of the race, the world's largest container ship. It started simultaneously with the other participants from the port of Shanghai. Its route went through the South China Sea, the Strait of Malacca, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and the Red Sea. It passed through the extremely narrow Suez Canal to reach the Mediterranean Sea. Its final checkpoint is the Strait of Gibraltar, the stretch of water that separates Europe from Africa. Finally, it has arrived in the port of Portugal. The ship makes a victory honk. The captain looks through his binoculars and sees that the AN-225 crew, train crew, and the truck driver are already standing on the coast. He crossed the finish line last. The whole trip took this ship 20 days. See how the places are arranged on the pedestal: the airplane, the train, the truck, and the ship. Now, the plane wins if we compete just for speed, but each of the participants takes first place in a particular category. Which of the contestants in the race deliver the goods as cheaply as possible? Let's look at the train. To move 1 ton of cargo for 1 mile, you have to pay 4 cents. So if you want to ship a ton of freight from Los Angeles to New York, it'll cost you about $100. In our case, with a train route of about 7,000 miles, the shipping price of 1 ton of goodies would be about $280. The price is low because of the train's efficiency. It has smooth metal wheels that run on smooth metal rails, so it doesn't have much drag like a truck with rubber tires on asphalt. Meanwhile, let's look at the airplane. It takes $1.21 to move 1 ton of cargo per mile. The route covered by the AN-225, including a stop for refueling in Dubai, is approximately 7,800 miles. That means the cost of shipping 1 ton of cargo will be roughly $9,500. That's 34 times more expensive than by train, though 6 times faster. But this is the price for modern and fuel-efficient aircraft. The AN-225 engines are old and not as efficient. They burn more fuel, and the price will be even higher. Regarding the truck, 1 ton per mile costs 20 cents. So shipping from Shanghai to Portugal costs about $1,400, 5 times more expensive than a train. In recent years, the price of shipping a container by cargo ship has increased 7 times. It costs about $14,000 to ship cargo from China to Europe. Prices have gone up so much because of the container shortage. Internet commerce is growing fast, and so is the need for consistent shipments across the globe. We just don't have enough containers to meet those needs, but we expect the price of ocean shipping to drop by 2023. So the shipping method should always be chosen carefully. An airplane is best for delivering expensive goods that are needed urgently. The train is perfect for a large volume of goods, which at the same time is cheap. We primarily use trains to move containers from seaports to distribution points farther inland. The main advantage of trucks is their mobility. They can take containers to places the train can't reach because there is no railroad, or where there is no access to water, and it's impossible to deliver the cargo by ship. Trucks can also deliver goods directly to city centers. Shipping on giant container ships is suitable for huge amounts of cargo, for something not too heavy, but something you can fill a container to the top. Despite the price, most of the goods in your nearest supermarket are brought in by ship. They have traveled thousands of miles in containers around the world. Globalization happens thanks to the container. The same product costs just about the same price all over the world. People in different parts of the planet can wear the same sneakers and eat the same fruit because, a while back, someone invented a way to transport stuff we all like to buy in universal containers.
April 1912 marked one of the most terrible tragedies in the history of the world. The most unsinkable vessel, the pinnacle of engineering at that time, the huge Titanic, sank. On that dark, moonless night, the ship had many chances to save its passengers. There was another ship just a few miles away that could have saved the Titanic, but it didn't. It wasn't a phantom ship, and it's not some legend or a theory. This is a documented reality. There are records and witnesses' statements confirming this, but why didn't this ship help? Let's find out what happened that night by looking at these events from 3 different points of view. Let's start with the Titanic version. 11:30 p.m. The moon hides behind black clouds. Visibility is bad. Everything is calm on the Titanic. Under the captain's guidance, the communications operator stays in touch with the mainland through the radio. At this moment, some stranger breaks into the frequency, interrupting the operator's communication. It's unclear what this strange man wants and what he's talking about. The operator doesn't try to figure it out. He shouts at the guy, demanding him to disconnect. The connection is interrupted. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic crashes into an iceberg. The ice breaks the hull. Water begins to flood the lower decks. Nobody is panicking yet. 20 minutes later, at midnight, the ship's crew sends a distress signal through the radio frequency. Few people understand how bad the situation really is. After 20 minutes, at 12:20 a.m., they start lowering lifeboats with passengers. At 12:25 a.m., they receive a response to the distress signal. This is RMS Carpathia. Their captain reports they're already sailing at maximum speed towards the Titanic. But the problem is that the crash site is 58 miles away. This means Carpathia will only be here in 4 hours. At 12:45 a.m., the sinking ship's crew release rockets into the air. These flares are one of the main reasons for the terrible fate of many passengers, but more on that later. 90 minutes later, the Titanic's deck breaks and the ship dives underwater. At 4:10 a.m., the Carpathia finally arrives at the shipwreck location. The crew members make heroic efforts to save all the people. They take 705 survivors on board. At this moment, another ship appears. It's SS Californian. The Carpathia sails towards the New York coast with all the people. The Californian floats in search of passengers and finds nothing but wreckage. The ship was only a few miles away while the Titanic sank into the icy water. The Californian could have saved these people, but did nothing. Its captain, Stanley Lord, made one of the most terrible acts that a sailor can allow. He didn't help a sinking ship. When the world found out about all this, they detested Captain Lord. They couldn't bring charges against him, and the trial didn't punish him. But his career was ruined entirely, as no other ship company would hire him. Despite this, he never confessed he had been guilty. Before he passed away, the captain said it hadn't been his fault. If this was true, then what happened there? This brings us to the Californian version. It's the night of April 14th. The Californian is sailing in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The ship gets into a section with a lot of icebergs. At 10:10 p.m., Captain Lord stops the ship. It's too dangerous to move around this area, as they can damage the hull. At 11 p.m., the ship starts drifting. It's impossible to move in such conditions with such poor visibility. The captain knows that the Titanic is coming here, so he orders the radio operator to warn the ship about the danger. Radio operator Evans turns on the receiver and tries to contact the Titanic. He spends about 30 minutes on it. The connection is finally established. At this moment, the Titanic radio operator is speaking with the mainland. Evans interrupts this conversation and tries to warn the ship about icebergs. The operator doesn't understand Evans' words. He's annoyed because Evans broke into the channel so brazenly. He shouts at Evans and cuts the connection. Tired, Evans turns off the receiver and informs his superiors about the incident. It's still a mystery how the captain reacted to this news. He probably thought the Titanic knew about the danger. He lets Evans go to bed. If Evans hadn't turned off the radio and waited 1 hour, he would have heard a distress signal from the Titanic. But you shouldn't blame him. At this point, he has no official reason to stay at the transmitter. Evans is too exhausted and can't fight drowsiness. So, Evans goes to bed. The Titanic begins to sink. Its captain sends a distress signal. The operator on board the Carpathia catches it, but the Californian doesn't, since the receiver is turned off. Captain Lord can't sleep. He feels that something is wrong. Meanwhile, the Titanic is rapidly sinking under the water. The captain gives the order to launch rockets into the air. And here is where one of the critical mistakes takes place. They release warning lights, but they are not red. The crew forgot to take red rockets on board for some reason, so they lit up the sky with a bright white light. If you need to send a distress signal, you need to release red lights. Captain Lord sees these lights, but doesn't perceive them as a cry for help. It can't be that there are no standard red rockets on such a massive ship as the Titanic. But, unfortunately, it can. Captain Lord thinks the Titanic is sailing away. Perhaps there is some unknown reason behind those white lights, but he doesn't really know. So, Captain Lord has no idea that the Titanic is sinking. He still decides to contact the ship, but this time, not through radio communication. Captain Lord doesn't wake up the radio operator and sends a signal to the Titanic through a signal lamp. It's important to understand that many old-school captains didn't take radio communication seriously. They didn't understand the value of this technology. That's why Captain Lord doesn't wake up Evans. He sends light signals, but the Titanic doesn't respond. Many survivors later mentioned seeing the flashing lights of the Californian, but there was nothing they could have done. The ship's crew doesn't hear their cries for help. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic completely goes underwater. A little more than 2 hours later, radio operator Evans wakes up and turns the transmitter on. He hears many rescuers talking about the sunken ship. Evans understands everything. He reports this to the captain. At that moment, the Californian immediately heads to the wreck site. They meet Carpathia there. With the survivors on board, it sails towards New York. The Californian stays sailing and looking for people. They find nothing but wreckage. The Californian returns to the mainland. The news about the ship that could have saved the Titanic is spreading all over the country. The trial begins. Captain Stanley Lord and the crew tell their version. They say their ship had been standing still. Many people don't believe them, and some of the surviving passengers claim to have seen the Californian sailing by. Still, the judge declares them innocent. 1962. Captain Stanley Lord is a very old man. He calls a notary to confess something. The captain makes his last remark about this case. He swears he's not guilty. But if it wasn't the Californian sailing past the Titanic at that moment, then what? The Samson theory could answer that question for us. The sealing ship Samson is sailing in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The crew aren't sleeping. They carefully study the surroundings, but not because they're afraid of icebergs. They're scared of meeting with the U.S. Coast Guard. The Samson ship's crew catch seals, which is illegal. At 12:45 a.m., Samson's captain sees white signal rockets. The team is sure it's the Coast Guard. They turn off the lights and sail away. It's dark, so they don't notice the sinking Titanic. They return to the coast of Iceland and hear about the disaster. They realize they have abandoned the drowning passengers. The nephew of one of Samson's crew members reads about this story in his uncle's diary. The nephew asks for permission to publish these recordings. All the people realize that Captain Lord wasn't guilty, but unfortunately, he didn't live to see this moment. Actually, it's still unknown who is guilty in this story. 2 ships were nearby the Titanic. Their captains were adequate people. They would have helped save all the passengers. Their fault was that they couldn't understand what the Titanic wanted on that dark night. Someone forgot to put red flares in the box. This small but fatal detail was one of the leading causes of the tragedy.
So in 2017, over 25 million people boarded cruise ships all over the world. Now, if you're keeping count, that's more than the total population of Greece. It's become America's favorite choice when it comes to going on vacation. It's easy to see why hopping aboard a cruise ship becomes more popular each year. Heading out on a cruise is also coming back in style with newer generations. 2/3 of Gen Y and Millennials say that cruising is their new preferred type of vacation. How's that? Well, let's see. It's easy to plan in advance. On board, you can find activities for all family members, and you get a chance to visit several different destinations in one trip. An added bonus of booking a cruise? You can sample various places for a future time off. The entertainment on board is often top-notch, providing passengers with an added taste of luxury. And the amenities and accommodations are generally very reliable. Not to mention that it gives tourists that feeling of actually getting away from everything that people strive for while out of the office. Royal Caribbean International is one of the largest cruise lines in the world, with just over 19% of the cruise market as of 2018. Its current fleet is divided into many different classes of ships, including the Voyager class, Radiance, and Quantum. The latest addition to the Royal Caribbean International's impressive fleet was built in 2018. Wonder of the Seas is now the largest cruise ship in the world. Since this spectacular liner has just had her maiden voyage in March 2022, let's look at some of the incredible perks it has to offer its passengers. For starters, the boat is so big that it had to be split into neighborhoods. Well, it figures since Wonder of the Seas can accommodate almost 7,000 passengers. Fond of New York? Well, no worries. Wonder of the Seas has a central park of its own, with an estimated 10,000 plants to check out. The ship's central park is a feature of all Oasis-class ships, being one of the so-called neighborhoods. Let's look at some other areas, shall we? Like this boardwalk, a place that includes an arcade, a candy store, and a sports bar. It's best suited for long walks. There's a pool and sports zone on Wonder of the Sea. These areas feature the ship's numerous pools and hot tubs. There are many activities to check out on the sports court. Then there's the Royal Promenade, or Promenade if you prefer. That's the main road on Wonder of the Seas, with bars, lounges, and places to grab a cup of coffee, or a luxurious latte. The entertainment neighborhood is the focal point for leisure activities on the ship. Here, guests can find a comedy club, an ice skating rink, and even a theater. The spa and fitness area is a tranquil zone with a huge array of treatments available. The fitness center is free of charge, by the way, so there's no excuse for guests to skip a leg day. An extra 8th zone was added to Wonder of the Seas. It's called the Suite Neighborhood. This is an exclusive area designed for guests staying in the suites. Oh, now I get it. It's located at the top of the ship. Guests here have designated staff members called Royal Genies. Yeah, if you rub a lamp in your suite, they appear. Nah, not really. The genies are similar to butlers. They can cater to just a few cabins. Of course, the cruise line wants to divert other guests from asking these crew members various questions and taking their time. That's why the genies don't wear name tags in public areas. As for its itinerary, Wonder of the Seas was initially supposed to be homeported in China, but Royal Caribbean decided to move the liner to the United States. In March 2022, the ship started its journey with 7-night Eastern and Western Caribbean itineraries. In May 2022, Wonder of the Seas is scheduled for a trip to Europe, with Western Mediterranean cruises from Barcelona and Rome planned for its guests. Passengers will also be able to visit Palma de Mallorca, Spain, and Capri, Italy. When the summer season is over, Wonder of the Seas is scheduled to return to Florida to offer year-round sailing starting November 2022. And by the way, there is no truth to the rumor that a special cruise only for highly allergic and hay fever sufferers will be called the Wonder of the Sneeze. Nope, not at all. Now, it's hard to imagine a ship so massive that can accommodate so many amenities on board. For example, the Titanic was the largest ship of its time, measuring 882 feet in length. And Wonder of the Seas is not only 1,188 feet long, it's also 36% taller and 34% wider. Speaking of lifeboats, which I am about to, Titanic had a mere 20 lifeboats on board, which was tragically not enough to fit all the passengers after the ship hit the iceberg. But Wonder of the Seas has an even smaller number of lifeboats, 18 to be precise. Sounds weird and dangerous? Well, not really, given that each of these lifeboats can accommodate up to 370 people. It means that all the passengers and crew members, an estimated 8,000 people if fully booked, are going to be safe in case of an emergency. If we could somehow have a race between the two ships, well, Titanic was in fact the faster ship out of the two, beating Wonder of the Seas by 1 knot per hour. Cruise ship passengers today are more interested in the experience rather than the speed of the boat itself. That's why how fast a ship can travel is not an extremely important aspect nowadays. In terms of costs, Titanic cost around $7.5 million at the time of its construction. It's the equivalent of about $200 million today. How about Wonder of the Seas? Well, it cost a staggering $1.35 billion to build, making it 6 times more expensive than the Titanic. How about we compare ticket prices? Well, in this case, the least expensive ticket on Titanic was £7. It's about $1,000 today. The cheapest ticket on Wonder of the Seas is currently $423, but prices may vary depending on the location, season, itinerary, and how much you tip your Royal Genie. And I know you were going to ask, how about icebergs? Well, Titanic steamed in the frigid North Atlantic, where you had to be on the lookout for those. Wonder of the Seas will be cruising the balmy Caribbean, where the worst thing you can hit on is 17 in blackjack. Oops, busted. Anyway, set side by side with its other sisters from the Royal Caribbean fleet, Wonder of the Seas is equally as impressive. The company's earliest ships could host about 2,500 people. This included passengers and the staff. Such ships were Splendor of the Seas, Legends of the Seas, and the smallest of them all, Thumbelina of the Seas. No, wait, that should be Empress of the Seas. Oops, my bad. The largest ships in the company's fleet can now house about 9,000 people altogether. That's almost 3 times the size and capacity of the earlier liners. Wonder of the Seas is one of them, as well as Harmony of the Seas and Symphony of the Seas. Are you seeing a pattern here? Yep, if you ever encounter a ship with Of the Seas in its name, it's safe to assume it belongs to Royal Caribbean. But if it's a can of tuna, it might actually be Chicken of the Sea. Hey, I like tuna. Now, choosing between cruise ships based on their size is like wondering if you should visit your local museum or the Louvre in Paris. It all depends on your preferences. Some families prefer small settings. Others are a fan of large spaces that can provide everything they need. Historically, it's equally as exciting how far we've come in terms of maritime transportation. The SS Royal William, for example, was the first boat to ever make a transatlantic voyage almost entirely steam-powered in 1833. And it was a mere 160 feet long and could house roughly 155 passengers. And if the seas were calm, then they were housed less roughly. Similarly, the first modern megaship in the world was the MS Sovereign of the Seas. Launched in 1987, it was only 888 feet long and could carry a little under 3,000 passengers. Size and capacity are not the single improvements added to newer cruise ships out there. Recent technological developments in artificial intelligence and facial recognition have allowed cruise operators to ensure faster, smoother boarding for passengers. If, in the past, it took from 60 to 90 minutes for all passengers to board a ship, nowadays, cruise ship operators manage to get people comfortably settled in less than 15 minutes. Now, I'm sure you're already eager to book a ticket, but let's look into some of the more interesting activities you can try on board Wonder of the Seas. This way, you'll know what you're getting yourself into. All Royal Caribbean ships have loads of artworks available for their guests to enjoy. But Wonder of the Seas goes above and beyond, even featuring statues of astronauts in key locations around the ship. You'll find the first astronaut looking through the glass at the promenade, while a second one is busy rock climbing at the boardwalk. The third and last astronaut is more of a movie fan. This statue can be found near the movie screen sitting area. Going astronaut sightseeing is proving to be quite the experience among guests. In the areas with no access to sunlight, Wonder of the Seas features virtual balconies. In case of bad weather, guests can still have a feeling of the outdoors, but without having to hide from wind or rain. Teenagers have a place of their own reserved on the ship. There's a special club with a private hot tub, selfie area, games, and comfortable seating. The inside part of this club features a vending machine, an interesting collection of literature, and tables for foosball. Well, sign me up.
The year was 1854, and the SS Arctic, the fastest passenger liner of its time, set out to cross the Atlantic. As it sailed through the misty veil, it slowly disappeared into the unknown. The Collins Line, an American shipping company, was started in 1818 and only began seriously trading in the transatlantic by 1835. Its steamships crossed the Atlantic from Liverpool to New York within just 10 days. Doesn't sound like a great speed today, I know, but back then, the same thing took other ships several weeks. Light on the water with their wooden hulls, powering through with a strong steam engine, those steamships were the favorite choice for many high-profile people. What could go wrong with such an advanced ship, they thought. This reminds me of some other ship everyone believed to be unsinkable. But anyway, back to the Collins Line. It grew to be a serious contender on transatlantic routes, with only one other competitor, the Cunard's Line. It was a British company also aiming to be the main force through the Arctic Passage. In 1835, the company received a new ship that traveled to Liverpool and came back to New York with the largest cargo ever at that time. From then, the Collins Line was steadily growing. It seemed like there would only be future successes for it. Unfortunately, their lavish ships became costly to run with the amount of coal used. Massive power along with weak wooden hulls meant they needed many repairs after each voyage. So, every trip ended up being expensive. But since the ships were safe and had a great reputation, people were willing to pay the price, and the company was definitely not in crisis. They had achieved something no one had managed to do before them. Like I told you, their ships crossed the Atlantic in a whopping 10 days, and Edward Collins, the owner, was very determined to maintain the pace. Their 5 ships easily outran the Cunard's line of only 3. With this great praise, it provided more attention. Though the Cunard's ships were slower with their iron hulls, they believed there was still profit, regardless of how slowly they sailed. Among Collins' ships, the Arctic, the third of them to be launched, was the largest, reaching 284 feet long, with 2 side-lever steam engines, each with 1,000 horsepower. The paddle wheels made 16 revolutions a minute when at full speed. At the time of its launch, the press called it the most stupendous vessel ever constructed in the United States. But glamour and fame couldn't avoid what would come next. On the 27th of September, the Arctic was on its journey from Liverpool to New York, continuing a speed pace through the thick fog. It's possible that by that moment, after 4 years of record-breaking trips, the crew became overconfident with their sailing and the ship. Going only 50 miles from Newfoundland, they carelessly continued through the fog with no radio contact, sonar, or any other form of identifying objects, equipped only with Morse code. A smaller ship, the SS Vesta, which operated as a fishing vessel, often worked around Newfoundland. It was passing through the same path as the Arctic and crashed into its side. Shocked by the collision, the captain of the Arctic offered help to the much smaller Vesta, but it was soon clear that the damage that seemed minor on the Arctic was far worse. Beneath the waterline, a hole was letting water into the hull. The cost of the much faster wooden hull now seemed less valuable. They steered toward land, trying to plug the holes, but they weren't doing so well, and the seawater continued to pour in, filling up higher and pushing the ship down. And finally, once the engine room was full, it put out the boilers, taking away the massive power the Arctic was once legendary for. They moved slowly until coming to a complete stop. The ship continued to sink, and the order was to abandon it. At the time, maritime law allowed for the Arctic to carry only 6 lifeboats, only capable of saving 180 people. The crew and some of the passengers managed to push their way aboard and took most of the seats on those boats. Things were pretty wild, and everyone forgot about their manners, not letting the ladies and the youngest ones board first. It took 4 hours for the Arctic to sink. 150 crew and 250 passengers were on board. Those that weren't able to find a lifeboat made a desperate attempt to build their own rafts from parts of the ship. 2 days later, only 3 boats made it safely to the shore. The other 3 were never found. Believe it or not, the rescue party also saved some people that had been clinging to the wreckage for 2 days. Unlike the crew, the captain went down with the Arctic, but amazingly survived. He would be only one of 85 people that made it out of the 400 on board. When the news arrived 2 weeks later, the public responded with great sadness to the losses. Great anger soon followed towards the poor safety measures in the crew. The press published demands to change the laws for more lifeboats. It only made sense to have enough for every person on board a ship. But they ignored those requests. This neglect would lead to more disasters in the future. Enough lifeboats would only come into maritime law some 60 years later, after the disaster of the Titanic. Edward Collins' wife and 2 children were also aboard the ship and didn't return. He was heartbroken, but didn't stop running his business. The Collins Line still had a reputation to uphold, the biggest, fastest, and most luxurious on the Atlantic. Edward Collins would now build an even better ship than any other. It was named the Adriatic, and it was the largest ship in the world, 354 feet long. With 2 alternating steam engines that had never been built of this size. These steam engines at the time were at the height of engineering, though today you can only see them in models and toys. With the new addition of 2 masts, the Adriatic would also be able to sail if needed. Luckily, they made some lessons from the disaster of the Arctic. But before their new ship, the Adriatic, was built, another disaster had occurred. The sister ship of the Arctic had also sunk. They believe this second ship was desperate to stay in front of the Cunard's Line and hit an iceberg somewhere during the race. This weird contest took the lives of 141 people. The desperation of Collins and his weakly built hulls pushed the company towards bankruptcy in 1858. The newly built Adriatic, costing over $1 million, had only made one voyage in the end. And even that voyage was considered a disaster. The ship collided with a tugboat. It still managed to finish its maiden voyage at a suitable time. After the company had gone bankrupt, they had to sell the ship for only $50,000. They removed the great giant engines, replacing them with only sails. Although it was once the greatest ship on the high seas, it was only 30 years later until it was abandoned, labeled irreparable, and anchored in a river. The other remaining ships were also sold and only used for parts. Edward Collins left the industry altogether, seeking work on dry land instead. As the Collins Line was no longer in the mix, the Cunards would grow in strength. Without competition, they would win the Blue Ribbon for the next 30 years, and 180 years later, after producing hundreds of ships. They still have a constant presence on the seas as they provide transatlantic crossings, world voyages, and leisure cruises. To this day, the Cunard Line is the only one to run ships between Europe and America, and it's great proof that it's not always the fastest that's the best.
The food on the tables in the cruise ship's dining room seems freshly made. It looks like everyone just picked up and left. You panic and run outside to the main deck. There are plenty of slippers and sandals lying around, but no people around. You bend over the railing and see that the cruise ship is still moving. There's not a single staff member in sight. Your first guess is that they've all gathered somewhere for some reason, so you make your way to the captain. You walk through the long and maze-like corridors before you reach the control room. The door is wide open and someone has set the ship to cruise control. Some scenarios play out in your head. Scenario number 1 is that while you were asleep, everyone else woke up and decided to pull a prank on you, so they must be hiding somewhere on the ship. When you freak out because no one is around, they'll pop out of nowhere and surprise you with an awesome party and cake. The second scenario you come up with is that while everyone was enjoying their cruise, the ship accidentally entered the 4th dimension with everyone, including the animals on board. But then, why did they leave you behind? The third possible scenario is that everyone found a better cruise ship nearby and decided to abandon the ship for a better one. They just forgot to tell you. But why did they leave their stuff behind and their food half-eaten? You try to figure out what the controls mean, but it's just a bunch of random gizmos and flickering lights. There is no pop-up manual to study, but there is pretty fast Wi-Fi. You start your laptop and do a quick search on what some of these things mean. You quickly figure out that the ship is in safety mode and has automatic sensors to detect when the water gets too rough. You open up social media and try to contact some people, but your phone doesn't have a connection. Only the laptop, which is connected via cable, works. There's a radio to contact the mainland. You ring in, but no one's answering. Suddenly, your notifications pop up. You look at photos of your friends on vacation or back home. But they're not there. Only the backdrop with no one in there. Everyone has officially disappeared. except you. You try one last time to contact the rest of the world, but nobody is answering. You check out some of the cruise details and find out that the ship will need around 11 days until you reach the nearest dock. After looking at the map, you see a small remote island that's only 4 days' trip away. The cruise ship travels around 20 knots, which is around 23 miles an hour. Meanwhile, you discover the ship and enter some of the fancy places. The ads on TV just show an empty backdrop of the cruise ship without people, which makes it look quite lonely. On a 7-day cruise, a large ship can use over 9,000 pounds of lettuce and 45,000 pounds of eggs. In general, there are 2,000 steaks and 1,000 baked potatoes consumed per day on a cruise with more than 1,000 people. There is so much food and ingredients on the ship that you can technically last for years. You reach the receptionist desk and talk over the intercom radio to make official announcements. Hello? Hello? Just the sound of crickets. Okay, if this is some kind of prank, it's not funny. You can come out now. I'm going to the underdeck for some snacks. You wait for an answer, but no one is coming. You decide to go to the lower decks of the ship, but before you head down, you check out the ice skating rink with no one there. You slip on some ice skating shoes and go for a little spin. It feels good with no one to bother you or tell you what to do. After that, you check out the game room and play some arcade games. You use the coins from the counter and play for hours. The sun begins to set, so you decide to have a refreshing drink and enjoy the view. You sit on the top deck where only the VIPs are allowed and grab the biggest sunbed to lay on. It's so quiet that you can hear the ocean waves. You fall asleep there and wake up the next morning because of the bright sun. You walk around trying to see what to do. You grab a golf club and start swinging. You get the balls into the ocean and keep playing until you get bored. You realize that you got sidetracked with the activities and want to go to the lower decks of the ship. You check out the staff-only entry with a pass that you found lying around. You start descending to the bottom. It's getting darker. The power isn't working, so you grab a flashlight and look through the rooms. Crew members usually live in a dorm-style room with shared bunk beds. They have a common area for eating staff meals and have access to other recreational activities. The kitchens that serve the main restaurants are also located in the bottom areas. All the rooms look the same. There's a lot of noise coming from the engine room, which makes it creepy. The pipes are clanking and popping sounds bust from random places. The lights are flickering. There are shadows following you as you're moving with the flashlight you picked up from one of the rooms. You're scared. You call out to see if there's anyone there, but all you hear is your own voice echoing through the corridors. You're lost. You try to find your way back to the top decks, but everything looks the same. You start running and panicking. You trip over something and lose your flashlight. It's very dark. You wave your arms around and try to find your way out. You put your hands on the wall and try to navigate around. You see a bright light at the end of the corridor. You walk towards there. You end up reaching one of the central kitchens with plenty of food lying around. There are dozens of fridges and a whole kitchen dedicated to desserts. Your stomach growls from hunger. You eat some of the most exotic and top-of-the-line food that can cost up to $1,000 per dish. You spend the next few days gobbling up the yummy treats, playing golf, and partying on the dance floor. 3 days later, you maxed out most of the fun stuff of the cruise ship. While basking in the sun, you see an island in the distance. You grab your binoculars and notice the dock where the ship is heading to. You quickly head to the control center and see the map. It needs 30 minutes to arrive, but you don't know how to park the cruise ship. You end up lowering the anchor to stop the ship. You'll then use the rescue boats for rowing to the island. You gather some supplies and food and row. Maybe someone on the island can help you out. You descend and row to the shore. You enter the city, but it's empty. People have left their cars in the middle of the road during their commute. You head to the police station to see if you can get some answers, but nothing. Months later, you've explored the whole island and saved plenty of food from the cruise ship. After 5 years, you've taken complete control over the island and learned how to drive the cruise ship properly. You haven't seen a single person since that day on the cruise ship. It's like everyone picked up and evaporated. 10 years later, you're sitting in the radio tower. You have a full-grown beard and fields of crops all over the island. You haven't stepped foot on the cruise ship for 3 years. Suddenly, you catch some signal on the radio in Morse code. Someone from the mainland is trying to contact you. You decide to get back on the ship and make your way there.
Icy water squeezes your chest so you can't take a deep breath. You hear people yelling around. It's late at night, and the endless sea blends with the black starry sky. You're scared and cold. The ship you were just aboard is going down into the depths of the ocean. People who have been in a shipwreck often remain afraid of water for the rest of their lives. But the woman whose story you'll hear survived not 1, and not even 2, but 3 ship disasters, and continued to work on cruise liners as a stewardess. Meet Violet Jessup, Miss Unsinkable. Her childhood can be described in one word: short. She had to grow up quickly to take care of her siblings. Violet was the oldest of 9 children. Life became even more difficult when she became very ill. The doctors were sure she wouldn't survive, but she did. At a young age, she moved to England with her mother, took care of her sisters, and attended a convent school. Her mother worked as a stewardess at sea, and when she fell sick, young Violet followed in her footsteps. But because of her youth and beauty, no one wanted to hire her. They thought she would distract passengers and crew. Violet didn't give up, though, and came to one of the interviews in her worst clothes and with unkempt hair. She wanted to show she was ready for hard work on the ship, and she had it. The girl was hired. The first 2 years passed quietly, but then a series of incredible fortunes began, or misfortunes, depending on how you looked at it. In 1910, Violet got a job on the most luxurious liner of the time, the Royal Mail Ship Olympic. The ship sailed across the Atlantic from England to America. The engineers didn't focus on the speed of the vessel, but on its comfort. Violet worked on the ship and was paid just £2 a month, the same as £200 today. Hard work on the ship's deck from morning to night didn't frighten Violet. She loved the job. She liked to talk to people and enjoyed the beautiful views of the Atlantic. So, on September 20th, 1911, Violet worked on the deck as usual. The sea was calm and the weather was excellent. Nothing boded ill. The ship sailed through the Solent Strait, which separates the Isle of Wight from the British mainland. At this moment, the British military cruiser Hawke appeared ahead. It should have passed by the Olympic, but something went wrong. The ships went straight at each other. The Olympic's captain tried to maneuver to avoid a collision, but failed. The Hawke's bow was designed specifically to ram other ships. At that time, it rammed the Olympic. Boom! The liner shuddered, and the people screamed in fear and panic. The ship had a huge hole in the starboard. Violet fell from the force of the blow. It seemed one of the biggest liners of its time was going to sink. But luckily, that wasn't the case. Both ships stayed afloat, and nobody got hurt. This time, fortune was on Violet's side. The accident on the ship didn't frighten the young woman. She didn't give it a second thought and continued to work as a stewardess. In April 1912, she took a job on the best, unsinkable ship of the time, where she was supposed to serve VIPs. Initially, she didn't want to work on this ship, but her friends persuaded her. And thus, she boarded the Titanic on April 10th, 1912, and left the port of Southampton, for better or worse. The first days of work were peaceful, but on the 4th day of the voyage, one of the most notorious disasters in the world struck. Violet was resting in her cabin. She was almost asleep when she felt the jolt. At that moment, she was called to the upper deck. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, almost no one panicked. No one believed that the unsinkable ship could actually sink. At the time when the ship's hold was being filled with water, everybody was calm on the upper decks. Violet along with other stewards, was present during the evacuation to the lifeboats. Women and children were evacuated first. Then, one of the ship's officers ordered Violet to get into a boat to show the other women it was perfectly safe. When she did, others followed, and someone suddenly thrust a swaddled baby into her hands. Without a second thought, Violet hugged the child to her chest to keep it warm, while the Titanic was sinking. She didn't let go of the baby until her lifeboat was picked up by the Carpathia, a ship that came to the rescue. Already on board the ship, a woman ran up to her. She didn't say a word and snatched the child from Violet's hands. Violet thought the woman was the baby's mother, so she didn't try to get it back. She was too freezing and numb to think how strange it was that this woman hadn't said thank you to her baby's savior. Many years later, Violet would be reminded of this child under unusual circumstances. After successfully surviving one of the most terrible shipwrecks in history, Violet continued to work at sea against all odds. In 1916, she took a job as a nurse on the hospital ship Britannic, a sister to both the Olympic and the Titanic, which sailed in the Aegean Sea. On November 21st, the ship took a route that it had already sailed several times, but on that particular day, it was out of luck. The Britannic hit an underwater mine. Violet managed to survive the third shipwreck in her life. This rescue wasn't as easy as the previous two, though. After the explosion, the huge Britannic began to sink quickly. It took less than an hour for the ship to go down completely. Violet didn't have time to board a lifeboat, so she jumped overboard into the cold water. There, she swam to the closest lifeboat and got on. But the rescue turned into a new danger. The ship's propellers were still working. They were spinning in the water and pulling the boat toward them. Violet jumped off the boat just in time to escape the propellers. But her ordeal was far from over. Already in the water, she was pulled under the ship's keel and hit her head. The only thing that saved her from losing consciousness, and probably her life, was her thick hair. In the end, Violet got away from the engine and was picked up by another boat. For the next few years, Violet was plagued by headaches. When she finally went to the doctor, he told her she was incredibly lucky. As a result of the incident on the Britannic, she had a fracture in her skull. 3 disasters that Violet managed to survive didn't stop her. She continued to work on cruise liners until 1950. She cruised the world twice on the luxury liner Belgianland. Fortunately, the string of mishaps ended, and Violet was never shipwrecked again. In 1950, she moved to Great Ashfield in Suffolk County. She'd worked at sea for almost 42 years. Content with her career, she settled in a large cottage built in the 16th century. But a year into her retirement, she received a strange phone call. It was late at night. Violet was asleep when the phone rang. She picked up the phone. There was a woman's voice on the other end. The lady didn't introduce herself and asked right away, "Excuse me, was it you who saved a baby on the Titanic?" Violet answered, "Yes." "It was me," the strange woman said. She laughed and hung up. Violet told her friend about this strange call. He assumed that some kids were playing a joke on her. But Violet had never told anyone about the baby before that call. According to the old records, the only child who was on the boat with Violet was a boy. But those same records also said the boy had been saved by another passenger. It's still unknown who the baby that Violet rescued was. And so, for surviving 3 different wrecks on 3 different ships, she was aptly dubbed Miss Unsinkable.
Ships have been around for at least 6,000 years, dating back to ancient Egypt. In the beginning, they were used for trading and exploring. Ships as an attraction became a thing only a bit over 100 years ago, but the first cruise ship wasn't the infamous Titanic as you might think. The first cruise ship that took passengers on a voyage was a German ship called Prinzessin Victoria Louise back in 1900, and it served for 6 years. Modern ships are of course more advanced, but they still have a limited lifespan. They usually serve for about 30 years. A ship much older than that isn't considered safe and stable anymore due to the metal fatigue, most often of the ship's hull. After ships finish their lifespan, they retire and get sent to a shipyard, where they get scrapped. Most famous and beloved ships have a better fate. They get turned into hotels and attractions. Since ships are extremely expensive to build, no wonder that they are so huge, often as long as 3 football fields and as tall as 20-story building. The companies want to accommodate as many passengers as possible, because it means better profits. Also, cruise ship cabins are built separately from the ship, because otherwise there wouldn't be enough space for the construction. They're added to the vessel already in the shipyard, where the ship is put together. Quite often, different parts of the ship are even built by different companies. Voyages are fun, but if you need to get somewhere fast, cruise ships shouldn't be your first choice, because they are very slow. On average, they travel at the speed of just 23 miles per hour. Ships travel way slower than cars and planes, because they move huge amounts of water. Move on the ground and you're fast. Now step in a swimming pool and try to run there. It'll be way harder for you to do, and you'll be way slower, barely moving through. Now keep in mind that you are much smaller than a ship. As we've seen, ships are massive. When you put something in the water, it displaces the amount of water that is equivalent to its weight. So a ship displaces thousands of tons of water and then pushes through it. That's why they are slow. Such huge ships sure have big anchors. An average anchor weighs like 4 grown-up elephants. The crew members try to avoid dropping the anchor when it's possible, because such a massive thing can severely harm the ecosystems at the bottom of the sea. When boarding a ship, the first thing we have to notice is lifeboats. The Titanic was designed to carry 64 lifeboats, but it only had 20 of them. The rest is history, but ever since what happened to the Titanic, ships are required to have safety equipment to accommodate 125% of the people on the ship. So, it's even more than required, just to be on a safe side. But here is the story. In 1915, 3 years after the Titanic sank, a cruise ship called SS Island, which was loaded with extra lifeboats and rafts, sank under the heavy weight of all that extra equipment. But don't worry, it never happened again. Even though modern cruise ships are very safe, it's good to be prepared. So let's take a look inside one of those lifeboats. Firstly, they are orange in color, and it's not just some orange. This one has a special name, International Bright Orange. Of course, there is a good reason to use it, better visibility. If we take a look at the color wheel, orange is the exact opposite of blue, meaning that it's most contrasting to it. So, in between the sea and the sky, which usually appear blue, an orange boat will be the most visible. Life jackets and life preservers are orange for the same reason, as you might have guessed. But International Bright Orange only became a requirement in 1962. Before that, the life jackets were mostly white. For example, look at those life jackets. These are the ones that were used by the passengers on the Titanic. But white isn't a good choice at all. It's particularly hard to spot a white life jacket and a white lifeboat on a white-capped sea. All the equipment inside the lifeboats must meet international requirements and must be kept in good condition. So, the crew members are required to do maintenance every 3 months to avoid any rupture and damage of the lifeboats and everything in them. Firstly, there is a fresh water and food ration, for obvious reasons. Then there is a portable compass, which helps determine the direction in which to steer it. The next thing is a signaling mirror. It's a device that allows the light to attract the attention of passing ships. A less expected thing inside is an embarkation ladder, a rope ladder with wooden or metal steps that are used to ascend or descend from one ship to another. And finally, there is a first aid kit. All cruise ships pick up stranded sailors and fishermen, and that happens quite often. So don't be surprised if your cruise ship stops in the middle of the sea to pick someone up. It's common practice. Ships can even change their course to pick up some stranded sailors if they get a distress call. Have you noticed that all ships, both cruise ships and container ships, always have the bottom of the hull painted red? Yes, it's a thing. In early times, when ships were mostly made of wood, sailors were painting the hulls with copper paint, because it was protecting the vessel from wood-eating worms, barnacles, and seaweed. The copper was the ingredient that was giving the paint that color. All this muck wasn't only impairing the vessel's structure, but was also increasing the drag, preventing the ships from moving as fast as they could have. So, protective paint is important to reduce the number of barnacles that get accumulated. These days, of course, hull protecting ingredients can be added to any kind of paint, and there is no practical need to paint the bottom of the hull red, but it's still being done to honor the old tradition. Still, even the most modern paint doesn't allow to completely avoid the growth of barnacles on the hull. Also, most ports don't even allow you to scrape those off the hull once you dock. That's because the ships that arrive from faraway waters can bring along non-native species of seaweed and other organisms which can severely harm the local ecosystem. Crew members sleep in that lower part of the ship, the underwater one. It's called a B-deck, and there are dorm-style rooms in the hull just for the crew members. Also, you might have noticed that there are numbers painted vertically on the side of the hull. The red background helps them stand out more, which is important since those numbers are crucial. They help you understand how much load the ship is carrying. The more weight there is on board, the lower in the water the vessel will sit. If you watched movies about pirates or heard sailors talk, you might have noticed that the ships are referred to as she and often have female names. It is an old tradition to consider a ship as a female figure, most often a mother or a female deity that is guiding and protecting the crew. It is also believed that the name of the ship brings good luck to the ship, as well as to the crew and the passengers. People who spend their lives in the sea have many superstitions regarding boats. Finding a cat aboard is considered good luck, even if the cat is black. They are very handy because they hunt mice, therefore keeping the ship clean and safe. But bananas aboard is a no-no. It's especially common among fishermen. They believe that if there are bananas in the boat, the fish